American TV series, starting to profit from young Sheldon. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 151, Being a Guest. Mike didn't indulge Sheldon. After laughing, he said affirmatively, "You are just jealous." However, Sheldon, who firmly believed that he was not as good as Peggy, immediately asked back, "Then give me a reason to explain why I'm jealous." "Okay, first, you pay a lot of attention to Professor John, but he seems to care about Peggy." Mike gave an example. For this point, Sheldon wanted to refute it, but it was the fact that he would not go against his heart. Moreover, Mike had not said it clearly on this point, and he forgot himself. Sheldon, who already regarded Mike as a friend, felt uncomfortable when he saw him joking with Peggy. On this side, Mike continued, "Second, you have always been used to being the smartest person. Now Peggy appears. She is younger than you, and seems to be no worse than you in IQ." Mike gave Sheldon enough face. If he really wanted to say it, it was obvious that Peggy had a higher IQ. Third, control your emotions. Seeing that Mike was about to continue, little Sheldon couldn't sit still, and he quickly stopped him, saying, "Thank you, I said, it's a reason." In terms of emotional control and dealing with people, the low emotional intelligence little Sheldon is indeed not as good as Peggy. Seeing that little Sheldon was about to collapse, Mike was also very discerning and didn't continue. At this time, Grandma Connie, who was driving in front, smiled and said, "It sounds like that little girl named Peggy is really good. Shelley, I think you should be friends with her." However, Grandma Connie still underestimated the degree of anger of her little grandson. Until she got home, she found that the other party was still unhappy. Little Sheldon had never been in this state before, which made Grandma Connie a little worried. So she called Professor John. "John, I think you need to pay more attention to Shelley. He seems to be jealous of the little girl named Peggy." Grandma Connie said straight to the point. From a personal emotional point of view, Grandma Connie would rather let Professor John take care of her little grandson. After listening to Grandma Connie's request, Professor John pondered for a while, and then suggested, "Let's create another surprise for Sheldon. Maybe he can become good friends with Peggy." Professor John told his plan. He decided to let Peggy and her family visit little Sheldon and the Cooper family tomorrow. After all, two families with super little geniuses should have a lot of common topics. Moreover, in Professor John's opinion, if Peggy and little Sheldon, the two little geniuses, can get more familiar with each other, they are likely to become good friends. Here, after listening to Professor John's proposal, Grandma Connie also thought it was a good idea, so she told Mary the news. Mary was very excited to hear that she could communicate with a family that also had a child prodigy. After all, only she knew how tiring it would be to take care of a child prodigy like little Sheldon. Then Mary began to plan the preparations for receiving Peggy and her family tomorrow. On the other hand, when little Sheldon heard that Peggy would come to his house tomorrow, he was very resistant. Only after Mary's persuasion, he finally agreed reluctantly to contact Peggy again. Early the next morning, Mary turned down her work at the church and brought her family to the door, waiting for Peggy's family to arrive. Not long after, a black mid-2 high-end sedan stopped in front of the Cooper family. 4 people got out of the car one after another. Peggy's father Barry, mother Linda, sister Erica and Peggy. Today, Peggy was wearing a shirt with cute little flower patterns and a pair of overalls on the outside. This made her look cute and handsome. At the door of Cooper's house, George and his wife warmly welcomed Barry and Linda. On Peggy's side, she saw the reluctant little Sheldon, so she deliberately jumped in front of him. After scaring the other party, Peggy smiled and asked, "Where is Mike? I heard that he lives with you." "No, Mike lives across the street, at my grandma's house." Little Sheldon held back his anger and explained patiently. Then, he said, he may still be sleeping and now. Usually on weekend mornings, the Cooper family and Grandma Connie would go to church for worship, while Mike would sleep in beautifully and then start his own private activities. Really? It's really surprising. I didn't expect that someone like him would sleep in. Peggy looked at the house across the street and smiled. In her opinion, someone like Mike who performed well on the football field should be very self-disciplined in life. As a result, the other party would actually sleep in. This contrast made Peggy feel very interesting. Okay, please follow me. I have arranged our activities for the next few hours. Yesterday, after agreeing to his mother's request, little Sheldon also made a whole set of plans for today's reception. Here, Peggy took another look at the house across the street, and then followed little Sheldon into the Cooper's house. The two families were then divided into 3 groups to take action. Little Sheldon took Peggy to visit his room, George and his wife and Barry and his wife stayed in the living room to chat, and the rest of George and others went to play in the backyard. This is my desk, this is the book I read. Little Sheldon introduced the place where he studied at home one by one. However, Peggy seemed to have no interest in what he introduced. She picked up a huge Barbie doll from the side and said in surprise, "This is Barbie Princess Escher in the 16:9 book bar. There is no wrong version." No matter how high Peggy's IQ is, she is still a little girl now, and naturally she can't resist the beautiful Barbie doll. Wait, that's something Mike gave to Missy. You can't touch it. Little Sheldon hurried forward to stop him. Did Mike buy this? Peggy was a little surprised, and then she asked in surprise, "You actually live with someone else?" Peggy's father Barry is a dentist with a very considerable income, and she, who is the pampered one in the family, naturally can't understand the embarrassment of little Sheldon's life. However, this kind of embarrassment did not concern Sheldon at all. He asked casually, "Aren't you?" "No, I have my own private room," Peggy answered truthfully. "Okay," Sheldon answered casually again. Judging from his expression, he did not care much about the issue of private rooms. Then, he followed the procedure again and introduced to Peggy, "This is a poster of Professor Proton, and it has his autograph on it." When introducing the poster above the desk, Sheldon's face showed a smug look. Who is Professor Proton? He is the host who explains scientific knowledge to the audience on the Science and Education channel that Sheldon likes to watch the most. So Peggy looked at the poster and showed little interest. "Don't you know who he is?" Sheldon asked in surprise when he saw the other party's nonchalant expression. "Of course I know, he's just the host of the Science and Education channel." Peggy's eyes turned and she continued, "But I don't like him very much. When he explains scientific knowledge, he always treats others as fools. Because the Science and Education channel is a column that provides popular science to the audience, the style of Professor Proton's program is generally interesting, and the content is relatively simple. Do you like him very much?" Peggy saw that Sheldon's face was getting uglier and uglier, and then asked with a smile. In fact, Peggy didn't have any prejudice against Professor Proton. She just realized that Sheldon liked him very much, so she deliberately wanted to annoy him. Sheldon hesitated for a while and said insincerely, "In fact, I also think his program is very ordinary." Sheldon didn't want to be considered a fool by Peggy because of his preferences. Then, the unhappy little Sheldon continued to introduce dryly, "This is my desk lamp." Wait a minute, Peggy felt that it was boring to stay with little Sheldon like this, so she suggested, "How about we go and call Mike over to play together?" Little Sheldon also felt that staying with Peggy was torture, so his eyes lit up and he agreed, "This is a good suggestion." Chapter 152, Being a Guest, continued. Grandma Connie was very happy to see Sheldon and Peggy. After learning the intention of their arrival, Grandma Connie first prepared snacks and tea for them, and then went to wake up Mike. Mike was still a little grumpy after being woken up after sleeping in on the weekend. But when he walked out in a daze and saw the two people sitting in the living room, he suddenly became energetic. "Hey, Sheldon and Peggy, welcome to visit us." Mike smiled and greeted the two. Then, he picked up 3 intelligence attribute +1 light balls from the two of them, 2 from Sheldon, and 1 from Peggy. Although I don't know what happened before, it is obvious that Sheldon, a little genius, is more likely to burst out useful light balls when he stays with Peggy, a more talented little girl. After understanding the purpose of the two coming to find him, Mike decisively cancelled his plan to go to play with Katie and other girls, and chose to stay at home with these two super little geniuses. After all, dumplings can be eaten at any time, but intelligence attributes cannot be picked up every day. Sheldon, you take Peggy for a walk first, I'll go wash up, Mike said, and walked to the bathroom with a messy hair. Peggy, on the other hand, was not dissatisfied with Mike's sloppy image, but found it very interesting. Of course, this also depends on the person. Although Mike has a messy hair, it still does not affect his handsomeness, but has a kind of messy beauty. Can you take me to Mike's room? Peggy asked with interest. This is not good. Little Sheldon was a little embarrassed. He knew in his mind that a personal room is a very private place. It is very impolite to bring outsiders in without the owner's explicit permission. Grandma Connie on the side saw the expressions of the two little guys, so she said, "It's okay, Shelly, since Mike asked you to take Peggy for a walk, of course, his room is also included. Usually when Grandma Connie is free, she will also help Mike clean the room, so she knows that there is nothing strange in the other's room. Is that so?" After hearing what Grandma said, little Sheldon thought about it. Soon he figured it out. Mike didn't seem to say that his room couldn't be visited. So, little Sheldon took the curious little girl to Mike's room. "It's neater than I thought." Peggy walked around the room and nodded with satisfaction. Although Peggy didn't know what a high school boy's room looked like, she had an 8th grade sister in high school. The other party's messy room left a deep impression on her. Compared with her sister's bad room, Mike's room can be called clean and tidy. "We have seen Mike's room. Can we go?" little Sheldon urged. Although he agreed to take Peggy to visit Mike's room. But deep down, little Sheldon still felt that it was very bad to take a girl to visit other boys' rooms. So, he seemed a little guilty now. "Okay, let's go out and have a look." After satisfying her curiosity, Peggy didn't embarrass her. Next, little Sheldon took Peggy around Grandma Connie's house. Mike actually bought a computer by himself, so cool. In the living room compartment, Peggy stopped in front of Mike's computer. You know, high school students generally have no source of income, and a computer worth about 5,000 yuan is equivalent to the net income of an ordinary family for half a year. However, little Sheldon didn't feel much about the price of the computer. He casually said, "Mike rarely uses a computer. Most of the time, he will lend the computer to me and Grandma. In fact, Mike doesn't dislike playing computer, but the current computer configuration can't meet his needs for fun. Wouldn't it be more interesting to spend more time with girls like Katie?" On the contrary, Grandma Connie was addicted to playing games on the computer for a long time after Mike taught her. Here, little Sheldon continued, "The internet function of the computer is very useful. I have already checked the knowledge about quantum chromodynamics on it yesterday. It's not difficult." Yes, after being stumped yesterday, little Sheldon came back and made up for the relevant knowledge through the computer. "Really? Then have you seen my research report on quantum chromodynamics at high temperature?" Peggy asked with a smile, her lips slightly raised. Little Sheldon had of course seen the report, but he didn't want to be outdone by the other party in this regard. So, he said, "Actually, Mike and I have also published research. It's about rocket launches, which can be found on NASA's official website." "Interesting. Can I take a look?" Peggy asked. A perfect version of the 16:9 book forum. Little Sheldon, who saved some of the situation, quickly turned on his computer and switched the web page to NASA's official website. Rocket Launch 2.0, a very interesting topic. After knowing that the other party was not lying, Peggy's expression became more serious, and then she sat down and patiently read the information. The multi-stage propulsion theory and thruster recovery plan in this rocket launch report are very visionary. As a super genius, Peggy obviously also discovered this. "Very good research." Peggy, who quickly finished reading the report, showed an amazed look on her face. This situation made Sheldon, who thought he had turned the tables, raise his chin slightly. "Can you tell me in detail who proposed the multi-stage propulsion theory and the thruster recovery plan, you or Mike?" Peggy asked. "This was proposed by Mike," Sheldon said truthfully. "He helped me a lot in completing this report." In Sheldon's opinion, Mike only proposed two theories, and a large amount of data calculation and information integration in this report were completed independently. Therefore, Sheldon, who did more than 80% of the work, has reason to believe that he is more useful than Mike in this report. But Peggy doesn't think so. She obviously values the advanced theory proposed by Mike more. Looking at Sheldon's arrogant and complacent look, Peggy turned her eyes and said with a smile, "So you got Mike's help. Did you get the right to sign because you helped him?" Seeing that the fruits of his labor were rejected, Sheldon was very angry. He pointed out forcefully, "You didn't see the data above. I calculated them all." "So what?" Peggy showed a provocative look and said, "This doesn't prove that you are more useful than Mike in this report. Besides, it seems that he is smarter than you. How is that possible?" When his IQ was questioned, Sheldon finally couldn't hold it anymore. In other aspects, Sheldon might be able to take a step back, but in terms of IQ, he would never admit that he was worse than others. Moreover, according to his long-term observation, he also found that Mike was not that smart. Chapter 153 Competition. After Mike finished washing up and eating something, he went to the side hall and met two little geniuses, but the atmosphere here seemed a little wrong. Intelligence attribute +1. After picking up another ball of light from little Sheldon, Mike, in a good mood, smiled and said, "What are you discussing? Do you want to play computer games? I can recommend you some fun ones." Seeing Mike coming, little Sheldon cast his eyes over with a very complicated look. Obviously, as a super little genius, little Sheldon cares about what Peggy just said. As a result, he has some hostility towards Mike. "We don't want to play games." Peggy looked at Mike, who was more handsome after cleaning up, and said, "It's Sheldon. He thinks he is smarter than you." Here, Peggy didn't misinterpret what little Sheldon meant. Just looking at her raised corners of her mouth, she seemed to be watching the fun without minding the big deal. Mike looked at his intelligence of 173. From a certain perspective, his current IQ is indeed not as good as little Sheldon's. But, it's hard to say in the future. Mike, who was very confident in his heart, didn't really care about what Peggy said. So he admitted, "Sheldon is indeed smarter than me, and I can't deny this now." Hearing what Mike said, little Sheldon's expression softened, and he felt a little guilty. Ever since that math test, little Sheldon has always wanted to prove that he is smarter than Mike, but he has never succeeded. Now suddenly hearing Mike admit that he is not as good as himself, little Sheldon has a very subtle feeling. Proud? I can't say. Sympathy? It seems unnecessary. After all, Mike is already good enough. No, Mike, you are wrong. Peggy, who was waiting to watch the fun, said, "You have to compare to know the difference in intelligence." I agree. Little Sheldon immediately agreed. On the one hand, he wanted to help Mike resolve the embarrassment. On the other hand, he also wanted to compete with Peggy. Seeing little Sheldon's full of fighting spirit, Peggy knew the other party's intention without thinking too much. So, she said, "It just so happens that the three of us can take this opportunity to compare our intelligence. Mental arithmetic and shorthand are too low end for super geniuses. Moreover, Mike, who has the palace memory method, and little Sheldon, who has the image memory method, are indeed evenly matched in terms of shorthand. As for overcoming academic problems, this is not very fair to little Sheldon, who has a rich knowledge reserve at this stage. How about playing chess in the competition?" Little Sheldon's eyes lit up and suggested, "There are many ways to play chess, and the game is very challenging for mental calculation ability. In a way, the quality of chess can also indirectly confirm whether a person is smart or not." Moreover, in order to win over Peggy in intelligence, little Sheldon secretly played a little trick. After all, he had participated in the school's chess club before, and no one in it, including the instructor, was his opponent. Therefore, his proposal to use chess to test intelligence can be regarded as a sneak attack. Chess. Peggy thought for a moment and agreed. "Although I don't play much, this activity is indeed a test of intelligence, so I agreed." As a child prodigy, Peggy has her own pride. She actually vaguely saw that Sheldon's ability in chess might not be low. However, it seems good to be able to defeat the opponent in something that the opponent is good at. Yes, that's what Peggy is thinking. Seeing that the two little geniuses have already planned the competition items on their own, Mike said speechlessly, "Can I not participate?" Mike had played chess with Sheldon before, and the process was not pleasant. No one would feel good if they kept losing. Yes, in the game, Mike might only win 1 or 2 out of 10. This is when he is in very good condition. No X to Sheldon and Peggy rejected Mike's request at the same time. Sheldon's reason was that Mike was one of the few opponents who could make him feel fun in chess. And this competition was a 2 birds with 1 stone game for him. While enjoying the fun of playing chess, he could also prove with his strength that he was smarter than Mike. On the other hand, Peggy's reason for objection was even simpler. She just wanted to measure Mike's intelligence level. "I'll get the chessboard." Little Sheldon didn't give Mike a chance to refute again. After that, he hurried out. In the living room of the Cooper family, the parents of 2 pairs of little prodigies were also communicating. Peggy's mother, Ms. Linda, praised the decoration of the Cooper family very politely. It can be seen that she has done enough homework for this visit. And Ms. Linda's praise also created a very relaxed atmosphere for this exchange between the 2 families. Then, Mary, who thought she had met a soulmate, also diligently served special snacks to the Berry couple. Everything is moving in a good direction. A correct version in the 16-9 book bar. "Excuse me, does anyone want to drink some drinks other than black tea and coffee?" George, who was about to get a drink, also smiled and shook his head. Barry raised his hand and said, "If possible, can you give me a bottle of Lone Star beer?" Seeing Barry's cooperation, Mary smiled and joked, "George can meet your needs. After all, he is also a fan of Lone Star beer. He is at least half responsible for the factory not closing down." "Yes, I love it." As the atmosphere became more and more harmonious, George smiled and smoothed things over for his wife, and then went to get the beer happily. In his opinion, Mr. Berry, who likes Lone Star beer, can definitely become friends with him. To be honest, George hasn't made new friends for a long time, since he went to work in the sporting goods store. Mary, who stayed in the living room to greet the Berry couple, continued to chat with them. "Berry, I heard from Linda that you are a dentist." "Yes, actually I have my own small clinic in the local area." After Mr. Berry briefly explained his situation, he said with a little pride, "Do you know that Peggy started filing taxes for my clinic when she was very young?" In the United States, filing taxes is a very complicated matter. If the plan is reasonable, you can save a lot of money in the tax return. For example, the tax rate for home shopping and public institution shopping is very different. In addition, some purchases that are identified as luxury goods can also be used to offset taxes. In this case, there is a lot of room for tax return operation. Really? Mary felt that she had found a like-minded person, and she immediately broke the news happily. Shelley also started to file taxes for the family when she was very young. When the Berry couple heard Mary sharing, they felt like they had met a soulmate. So, Mr. Berry continued, "When Peggy filed taxes for me before, I only needed to pay her some small things like stickers and notepads. But this year, she has started to ask me for money." Mr. Berry's words sounded like he was in distress, but his face was full of pride. There is no way having a little prodigy at home is such a proud thing. At this time, George, who came back with a beer, also heard Mr. Berry's speech. He smiled and echoed, "Hey, don't let Shelley hear this kind of thing. We are still using book clips to pay him." At the same time, George also had a ostentatious smile on his face. Then, the 2 couples who also had child prodigies laughed knowingly. "Dad, I heard you mentioned me just now. What's the matter?" Little Sheldon, who went home to get the chessboard, happened to see the 2 couples laughing. "Ahem, we were just discussing some interesting things." George coughed awkwardly and then changed the subject. "Didn't you go to Connie's house? Why did you come back alone?" "I came back to get the chessboard." Little Sheldon briefly explained that he was going to compete with Mike and Peggy. "It seems that Peggy gets along well with you." George did not grasp the point that his youngest son wanted to express. He just thought that the other party had made friends with Peggy. So, after explaining to his youngest son and asking him to get along well with his new friend, George asked him to get the chessboard. Chapter 154 Who is the smartest person? Soon, Sheldon took the chessboard back. Because he was still upset about the evaluation, that he was not as good as Mike. So, he took the initiative to invite Mike to compete in the first round, and the winner was determined by a best of 3 system. Because he attached great importance to this competition, Sheldon played very seriously in the first game. On the other hand, Mike also wanted to see how big the gap between him and Sheldon was, so he played very cautiously. As for Peggy, she was paying attention to the chess game and would look at Mike from time to time. For a while, the side hall became very quiet except for the crisp sound of chess pieces falling to the ground. In this situation, the chess game was deadlocked for about 10 minutes. Then, as Mike fell into long thinking for longer and longer, his situation on the chessboard gradually fell into a disadvantage. Another 10 minutes passed, and seeing that the situation was irreversible, Mike decisively put down his king chess and chose to admit defeat. Seeing Mike take the initiative to admit defeat, the little Sheldon on the opposite side breathed a sigh of relief. I don't know if it was his illusion. He felt that Mike's chess skills suddenly increased a lot. Little Sheldon can be sure that he has not let up at all in this game. If it were in the past, he would have easily defeated Mike in about 15 minutes if he had been in this state. And if Mike used a delaying tactic in this game, he could at least delay the game for another 5 minutes before he could be completely killed. Don't underestimate the difference of 5 minutes. Generally speaking, it only takes about 5 minutes for a novice to play a game, and it takes about 10 minutes for an expert to play a game. Only when both players are very good and evenly matched will a game last more than 30 minutes. So from an objective point of view, although there is still a gap between Mike and little Sheldon, the gap is not as big as imagined. Little Sheldon seemed to have discovered this, so he said, "Mike, you are smarter than I thought." "Thank you," Mike smiled. Mike has become accustomed to little Sheldon's straightforward remarks, and in this game, he can clearly feel that his mental calculations have become more powerful. "You seem very happy." Little Sheldon couldn't understand why Mike looked so happy, even though he lost the game. "Yes, I found that I'm quite talented in chess." Mike made an excuse and then reminded him, "I will go all out in the next game, so be careful." After adapting to the high-speed operation of the brain, Mike was sure that he would perform better in the second game. "Come on," little Sheldon imitated the way Mike encouraged him before and encouraged him. In fact, this feeling is really good. As for Mike being able to beat him, in little Sheldon's opinion, there is no such possibility. After all, little Sheldon, who is in a serious state, has never lost to Mike in chess. In little Sheldon's opinion, the fact that the opponent was able to play so well in the first game before maybe that he performed beyond his level. Then, the two quickly started the second game. Peggy, who had seen Mike's true level, suddenly asked, "Sheldon, what do you like to do?" "Study, play toy trains." Little Sheldon said without any defense, "If possible, I actually want to learn a musical instrument." Obviously, he has not given up his pursuit of art. Peggy, who was talking to little Sheldon on the other side, smiled and continued, "It's a good idea. My mother is also considering letting me learn piano." Then, as the two people's topic gradually deepened, little Sheldon, who was doing two things at the same time, unknowingly spent half of his mind on chatting. And this is exactly what Peggy hoped. The little girl was using this method to help Mike. Sure enough, as little Sheldon was distracted, the situation on the chessboard had become increasingly unfavorable to him without him noticing. Just like that, more than 20 minutes later, when Mike finished the last move, he reminded, "Checkmate, how is it possible?" Little Sheldon was startled and quickly checked the situation on the chessboard. When he found that his shogi really had no way to survive, his face showed an expression of disbelief. When Sheldon realized that the time Mike took to win this round was shorter than the time he took to win the last time, it made him feel even more uncomfortable. But soon, Sheldon thought of the reason why he lost this round. He turned around and glared at Peggy angrily, saying, "It's you. What's wrong with me?" Peggy pretended to be innocent, and then pretended to be surprised and said, "Sheldon, you lost this round very quickly." Peggy's remarks were also a subtle reminder to Sheldon that he was not as good as Mike. Of course, the three people present were not stupid, and they all knew the reason why Sheldon lost this round. However, it was because of this that Sheldon was even more angry. He knew that, no matter what he said now, it seemed like he was quibbling. So, he said sullenly, don't be happy too early, the competition is not over yet. A correct version of the book is on 1619. When he said this, although Sheldon was facing Mike, the meaning of his words was directly directed at Peggy. I'm waiting for your challenge. Peggy still had a smile on her face and said, but you have to beat Mike first. The little girl seemed to want to provoke the other party's anger, but this time little Sheldon obviously would not be fooled again. With the start of the third game, in order to block out off-field factors, little Sheldon specially found two small cotton balls to plug his ears. On the other side, Mike, who was familiar with the two games, also felt that he was in very good condition. So, under this circumstance, the third game between the two became more and more exciting. Finally, after a fierce battle of 30 minutes, Mike still showed a losing trend in the overall situation. After another 5 minutes, he lost this competition with a slight disadvantage. Although Mike was a little unwilling to accept this kind of narrow defeat, he could accept it. As the saying goes, there is a long way to go. And after a hard fight, little Sheldon won, and he also got to know Mike again. He realized that, even if the opponent was not as good as himself, he was not much worse. Mike, when we have time, we can compete again. Little Sheldon took off the cotton ball from his ear and said solemnly. Okay, Mike nodded, and immediately gave up his position. It can be seen that the temporary victory or defeat did not affect his mood very much. Here, after Peggy sat down, she saw that little Sheldon was about to put the cotton ball into his ear again. She said provocatively, are you afraid to face me? Hearing the provocation, little Sheldon paused for a moment, and then he put the cotton ball aside and replied firmly, not in this way. The two super geniuses on the field had already burst into a strong smell of gunpowder before they started playing chess. When placing the chess pieces, little Sheldon's eyes turned and suddenly took out a wizard chess with a huge wizard hat from the corner of the chess box. What are you doing? Peggy asked in surprise. You know, although there are many ways to play chess, I have never heard of adding characters to the chessboard. Little Sheldon's behavior is obviously a foul. Chapter 155. Who is the smartest person? This is a new way of playing that I have researched. Little Sheldon explained with a little pride. This magical wizard chess has been given the ability of shifting by me. As little Sheldon explained, he thought that, since there were kings, knights, and soldiers on the chessboard, powerful wizards should also have a place. However, it sounds unreasonable that wizard chess appears on the chessboard. This is probably a temporary way for little Sheldon to disgust Peggy. I agree with your innovative spirit, but can you tell me, when wizard chess has the ability to shift, how can the opponent kill your king chess? Peggy asked sarcastically, after listening to little Sheldon's introduction. According to little Sheldon, the wizard chess, with the ability to shift, can swap positions with the chess at any time. In this case, the opponent will never be able to kill the chess player with wizard chess. Obviously, the existence of wizard chess has destroyed the balance of the game. Little Sheldon thought about it and realized this problem. So he quietly put away the wizard chess. In order to ease the embarrassment, he also said, very good, your intelligence has been recognized by me. Faced with the condescending tone of little Sheldon, Peggy responded to him with a look of contempt. Then, the two super little geniuses also started their own chess games. On the other side, the Cooper family, the two pairs of parents of little prodigies, also talked about their smart children unconsciously. In order to get closer to the other family, Mary broke the news again. Do you know that little Sheldon has many quirks? Every time he goes to the supermarket, he can't help but put the goods on the shelf neatly so that the side with the trademark faces the customer. Yes, because of this situation, the supermarket sorter almost loves him to death. George smiled and agreed. Of course, this habit can be very annoying in certain situations. Mary continued. For example, when Shelley saw that the tiles in the bathroom were not aligned, she refused to use the bathroom. Yes, during that time, Shelley chose to take a bath in the sink. This situation continued until the workers relayed the tiles in the bathroom. Talking about his youngest son's embarrassing story, George looked very happy, and this happiness came from the inside out. In fact, accepting children's shortcomings is also a manifestation of love for each other. The funny stories shared by George and his wife also made Barry and his wife laugh out loud. Just as the atmosphere on the scene was becoming more and more harmonious, Mary suddenly asked, "Has your Peggy ever had such strange behavior?" Obviously, sharing your child's embarrassing stories with each other is the most convenient way to bring the two parents closer. "Oh, our Peggy." Mr. Berry was about to say something, but Ms. Linda quickly interrupted her husband and said, "Our Peggy is very sensible and has never had this situation." After saying that, she glared at her husband intentionally or unintentionally. Mr. Berry's expression froze, and he stopped smiling and said, "Yes, our Peggy is very sensible." As the Berrys spoke, the laughter disappeared. The dishonest behavior of the Berrys made Mary feel very unbalanced. She felt that she had told the child's embarrassing things, but the other party didn't say anything, which obviously looked down on her. "You sit down first, I'll go cut some fruit for you." Mary forced a stiff smile on her face and took her husband to the kitchen. After going to the kitchen, Mary's face changed instantly and she said dissatisfiedly, "They are lying, not sincere at all. I'm crazy to want to be friends with them." George on the side was very calm. When he saw his wife angry, he quickly comforted her. "Forget it, Mary, maybe their children are really excellent." Hearing her husband say this, Mary became even more unhappy. She was unwilling to admit that her little son was not as good as the other party's little daughter. So, after scolding her husband for a few words, she walked out angrily with the cut fruit. On the Berrys' side, they also found that George and his wife, who came back again, were in a bad mood. So Ms. Linda looked at her husband for help. "George, I heard that you work on the football team. It must be very interesting. Can you tell me about it?" After getting his wife's hint, Mr. Berry immediately picked up the topic again. However, his speech made George very embarrassed. "Actually, I no longer work on the football team. I work in a sporting goods store in town now," George said with a complicated expression. "Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry." Mr. Berry saw that George was not in a good mood and quickly expressed his apology. As for what he was sorry for, he didn't know much. After all, for a dentist with a private clinic, he didn't know much about the two jobs of football coach or store clerk. And the scene fell into a cold atmosphere again with this conversation. On the other side, at Connor's grandmother's house, the first game between little Sheldon and Peggy was also at a critical juncture. Little Sheldon's expression did not look relaxed, while Peggy on the opposite side still looked at ease. "Sheldon, have you heard of the theory of parallel universes?" Peggy asked. Little Sheldon, who was thinking about the chess game, didn't want to pay attention to the other party. But what Peggy said was really attractive. Finally, after making the next move, little Sheldon couldn't help but answer, "Of course, I have studied the parallel universe theory proposed by Stephen Hawking. It is very interesting. A correct version in 1619 book bar." "Really?" Peggy followed the previous move without any pressure and said, "But I think this theory is a paradoxical proposition. If there is another identical world, it means that there is another us." Little Sheldon thought for a while and said, "According to the theory proposed by Stephen Hawking, this is very likely. They have the same wisdom as us." Thinking of another world and another self who is as smart as himself, little Sheldon was very excited. This made him feel that he was not alone. "Really? If people in another world are the same as us, then what is the meaning of their existence?" Peggy asked casually. As the two super geniuses asked and answered, their chess playing speed also became faster unconsciously. "Maybe people in another world are in a different time period from us. Sheldon over there is likely to be an adult and may have won the Nobel Prize. Little Sheldon has considerable confidence in his potential." "Well, you may be right," Peggy replied. Hearing what the other party said, little Sheldon thought he had convinced Peggy, and a victorious smile appeared on his face. But before he could be happy for long, Peggy picked up a chess piece and put it in front of little Sheldon's king chess, cheering, "Checkmate, I won, I'm the smartest person." At this moment, little Sheldon realized that he was cheated by the other party again. What Peggy said before was obviously distracting himself. Little Sheldon, whose brain was overloaded, told himself to calm down. But when he saw Peggy's smug smile on the opposite side, he finally couldn't help it. The last time he was so angry was the last time. Little Sheldon, who was overwhelmed by anger, overturned the chessboard, angrily folded his arms, and ran home. Peggy, who was startled by Sheldon's excessive actions, noticed Mike, who was watching the show, and asked, "Is he always like this? Normally, Sheldon wouldn't be like this." Mike smiled and said meaningfully, "But he's still a child, so this situation is understandable." After that, Mike crushed the light ball with intelligence attribute +1 that he had just picked up from Sheldon. It must be said that Peggy is gifted in dealing with Sheldon. Of course, this situation is definitely a good thing for Mike. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 156, Well-Behaved Children. "Mike, how about we play 2 games?" Peggy said expectantly after the two of them put away the scattered chess pieces on the ground. "No problem," Mike agreed readily, although he knew that he was not the opponent's opponent. Looking at Peggy's appearance, it seemed that she didn't really want to play chess. From her expression, it can be seen that she has too many things hidden in her heart and wants to find someone to talk to. This is exactly the case. Just after the chess game was set, Peggy suddenly said, "You know, in fact, I'm not that good. Moreover, my family is not as happy as outsiders see." As she said, Peggy's face lost its previous optimism, but instead showed a trace of melancholy that only adults have. All along, Peggy's excellence was the mother's wishful thinking. She hoped that she would have a smart, sensible, and well-behaved daughter. As for her daughter's feelings, she never considered it. But this daughter is too smart, and she knows that her mother has paid a lot for her. So deep down, she doesn't want to disappoint the other party. This contradictory and complicated situation is almost suffocating the girl. On the other hand, Peggy, who has high EQ and IQ, also found that her parents were not as loving as they seemed. They were even on the verge of divorce. Peggy was partly to blame for this. Because Ms. Linda devoted all her attention to her little daughter, she neglected her husband, Mr. Berry. Humans are emotional animals. After giving, they often want to get positive feedback. Mr. Berry provided the necessary financial support for the family, but did not enjoy the treatment that the head of the family should have. If this situation continues for a long time, it will definitely cause family disharmony. Peggy discovered this, but she couldn't change it, even though she was a super genius with high IQ and EQ. So, this is also the reason for her pain. Moreover, Peggy, who couldn't find a solution to her family problems, has a tendency to attribute the problems to herself. She put herself in her mother's shoes, and thought that, if she wasn't so smart, maybe her mother wouldn't pay so much attention to her, and she wouldn't have conflicts with her father. Yes, Peggy has now thought about how nice it would be if she were an ordinary child. Mike also saw that Peggy wanted to find someone to talk to about her distress, which might make her feel a little relieved. So, Mike patiently played the role of the listener. On the other side, at the Cooper family, George and his wife had lost their previous enthusiasm and were in the stage of awkward conversation with the Berry couple. Just then, little Sheldon pushed the door open and walked angrily to his room. "What's wrong with him? Did Peggy bully him?" Ms. Linda said, and was about to get up to find her little daughter. Seeing that the other party was about to trouble her little daughter, George quickly persuaded, "It's okay, Linda. Shella's situation is very common, and he will be fine in a while. As for your little daughter, I think Mike will take good care of her." Mary on the side also spoke up to echo her husband. Although she didn't plan to make close friends with the Berry couple, she didn't want to see the other family have conflicts because of her little son. "Well, I'll ask Peggy what's going on later." Ms. Linda also realized that this is someone else's home, and it seems inappropriate to discipline her little daughter now. Seeing Linda sit down, she still looked worried. Mary, who was afraid that the atmosphere would become more awkward, said, "Let's talk about something else. Will your eldest daughter feel jealous because she has a smart sister?" When there is no topic, talking about children is definitely the right choice. No, Ms. Linda shook her head and said, "Erica likes her sister very much and takes good care of her. Seeing that the other party was still insincere, Mary also smiled and said, "Really? In fact, our little George is also a good child. He is very good at taking care of his brother. Isn't it just praising your own children?" Mary said, "Who can't do this?" The two parents unknowingly entered the stage of comparing children. The children, who were well behaved and sensible in their mouths, gathered in the backyard at this time, complaining about their smart brother, sister, together. "You know, Sheldon is just annoying. He always makes me feel that I'm as stupid as a gorilla," little George said, but he looked at Erica intentionally or unintentionally. Erica, who is only in the 8th grade this year, is dressed very maturely and seems to be in a rebellious period. She echoed, "Peggy is the same. She's spoiled like a little princess at home. And she likes to find fault with me, saying that my room is as messy as a doghouse." Sheldon has intermittent obsessive compulsive disorder. Missy, who was sitting on the swing, tried to join the conversation of the two older children. However, George and Erica, who had already fallen in love with each other, completely ignored Missy. George said flatteringly, "Really? Sheldon is the same. He told on my mother last time and took away my important learning materials." Erica felt the same way about George's remarks. So the two boys and girls who had the same experience slowly approached each other little by little. Read the correct version in 1619 book bar. Ahem. Missy raised her hand. "I'm still here." Being interrupted, George glared at his sister in dissatisfaction, then made a gesture to Erica that he thought was handsome, inviting her. "I saw an abandoned TV in the alley before. Do you want to go and throw stones at it with me?" Erica thought about it and said with a smile, "It sounds interesting." When the two were about to go to the alley, George saw that Missy also wanted to follow, so he said, "Missy, I have some big firecrackers hidden in my room. Go and get them. We will use them to blow up the TV later." Missy didn't think much and ran into the house. It can be seen that the little girl was very excited to play with firecrackers. "Okay, let's go." George waited for his sister to leave and invited Erica again. "Aren't we waiting for her?" Erica asked. "No, in fact, the firecrackers are on me." George took out a firecracker as thick as a thumb from his trouser pocket and said proudly. Obviously, George was annoyed that his sister had disturbed his date with Erica, so he deliberately sent her away. "You are so mean." Erica realized George's intention. After she laughed and scolded, she immediately found him more interesting. Just as George and his wife and Barry were praising their children, a huge explosion was heard in the backyard. "What happened?" George was startled and stood up to look out the window. The other three people in the room were in a similar situation. "George, this liar, I was wondering why I couldn't find firecrackers in his room." Missy, who heard the explosion, came out of George's room and complained. "Missy, what do you know?" George asked sternly. Of course, George left me and took Erica to the alley in the backyard to blow up the TV. Missy told the truth. Chapter 157 Halloween. Soon, the two children, George and Erica, who had done something bad, were caught and taken back to the living room. Of course, the bad things did not only refer to these two people who used firecrackers to blow up the old TV. There was something more important than this. That is, when George and his wife and Barry and his wife rushed to the alley, they happened to see the two people hugging each other passionately. In the living room, George, who knew he had done something wrong, lowered his head guiltily under the stern eyes of his parents. Beside him, Erica, the rebellious girl, tilted her head to the window, with a broken jar and a broken posture. "I'm sorry for this. Next, I will discipline George." George apologized for his eldest son awkwardly. "It's not your fault." Ms. Linda glared at her rebellious eldest daughter, who was about to leave. So he continued, "Thank you very much for your hospitality. I think we should go." Then, she said to her husband, "Go and call Peggy too." The two children had such a thing, and they were caught by their parents on the spot. This obviously made the two parents lose the mood to chat. At Connor's grandmother's house, Peggy, who heard her father calling, put down the chess pieces and said, "It seems I should go. By the way, it's nice to chat with you." Peggy smiled after she finished speaking. In fact, the two of them were really chatting before. As for the chessboard in front of them, it had been so long, but they hadn't made many moves. "I have gained a lot from chatting with you. Mike smiled and crushed the light ball of intelligence attribute +1 that he had just grabbed from the other party. Then, he continued, if you need anything, you can always find me. I promise I will be a qualified listener. Thank you. After looking at Mike again, Peggy got up and walked out. After the Berry family left, Mary glared at her eldest son angrily. Obviously, this family gathering was a failure. This was a big blow to Mary, who attached great importance to family. And George, because of his previous behavior, must definitely take a large part of the responsibility for this failure. Seeing his wife about to explode, George quickly scolded his eldest son, "Little George, you really went too far this time." While speaking, George winked at his eldest son and continued to shout, "Go back to your room and reflect. When you know you are wrong, come out again." "I'll go now." Little George, who understood what his father meant, avoided his mother and quickly hid in his room. Just protect him. Mary, who had lost her target, naturally wanted to vent her anger on her husband. On the other side, the Berry family, who were driving back, were also in a very dull atmosphere. Without outsiders present, the gentle expression on Ms. Linda's face disappeared. After looking at her eldest daughter in the rearview mirror, she scolded, "Do you know what you did today? You have brought shame to our family." Linda's face was full of disappointment. "You don't need to care about what I do. Anyway, in your heart, there is only Peggy as your daughter." Erica choked. "Do you think I want to control you?" Seeing her eldest daughter being so disobedient, Linda was obviously really angry. "Look at what you are wearing. Your hair is messy. You don't look like a good girl at all. You look like a street slut now." Enough. Linda, hearing his wife getting more and more unpleasant, Mr. Berry stopped her in time. However, Mr. Berry's behavior of trying to reconcile made his wife point the finger at him again. "You are usually busy with work and don't care about the family at all. Otherwise, our daughter wouldn't be like this now." Linda was obviously furious at this time. Mr. Berry's extremely high income meant that his small clinic was destined to be very busy. In terms of providing a rich economic foundation for the family, Mr. Berry did what a husband should do. Mr. Berry, who wanted to defend himself, suddenly lost interest in talking when he saw his wife's strong appearance. Meanwhile, after Linda scolded her husband, she looked at her little daughter and asked, "What happened to the Cooper family's little son today?" Peggy, who was in a trance, replied, "I just played a game of chess with him. I don't know what happened." Seeing her little daughter's absence, Linda said earnestly, "Peggy, you really need to make more friends now. Sheldon is a little prodigy like you. You should get along well." Obviously, Linda was also worried about her little daughter's prodigy not being able to make friends. However, Peggy had her own judgment. She wanted to tell her mother that she could handle her own affairs. But seeing the other party's concerned look, Peggy finally couldn't say it. Then, she also turned her head out of the car window in annoyance. That look was a bit like her sister next to her. A correct version in the 16-9 book forum. 2 weeks have passed, and Halloween on November 1st is getting closer and closer. As a big festival, Halloween has a very important meaning. It can make people realize the value of peace and the element of terror. Of course, for the church, this day is also a good opportunity to spread the teachings, promote truth, goodness, and beauty. God loves the world. Before dinner that day, Mary gathered everyone together and played a video for them. The content of the video was the scene of Pastor Jeff being interviewed not long ago. The host asked, "Do you think the activities of Hell House are too bloody?" In the video, Pastor Jeff explained unconfidently, "No, in fact, the activities of Hell House can make people feel pain and realize the greatness of God." Then, the TV showed the activities prepared by the town church in Telford City for Halloween in previous years. To be honest, the real scenes of the performance of Hell House played on TV made Mike, a nervous man, feel that it was not suitable for children. Finally, the host gave the Telford Town Church's evaluation of the activities reported on Halloween in previous years. It would scare children. "Okay, everyone has watched it. Tell us what you think," Mary asked. For the church, Halloween activities are not only about spreading God's love for the world, but also have the task of attracting sponsors. After being criticized on TV, the small town church in Telford City may not be able to attract sponsorship if it does not change this year. Mary's task this time is to organize a different Halloween event for the church. I feel that the content of the activities in previous years is very good, and there is no need to change it. Missy spoke first. It can be seen that the little girl is very courageous. No, it must be changed. Mary rejected her daughter's words. How about this? Mike thought for a while and suggested, isn't it to promote God's love for the world? The church can make a set of comparisons based on Hell House and then Heaven House or something. With comparison, people can also more intuitively recognize the beautiful qualities of truth, goodness, and beauty. In fact, only with comparison can the preciousness of truth, goodness, and beauty be highlighted. Just showing the evil side will fall behind. Moreover, highlighting the content of goodness will definitely not have bloody scenes. This can also be regarded as a solution to the dilemma of the small town church in Telford City in previous years. Chapter 158 Halloween continued. After hearing Mike's proposal, Mary's eyes lit up, and she had an idea in mind. By the time of dinner, Mary's plan had taken shape. After the prayer before dinner, she said solemnly, I have already made plans for the church's Halloween event this time. In combination with the ideas proposed by Mike, I plan to hold 2 exhibition halls. One is the haunted house that highlights evil, and the other is the angel house that promotes goodness. After Mary's explanation, everyone realized that she just changed the name of the previous Hell House to Haunted House, and the content did not change much. And Angel House is a variation of the Heaven House proposed by Mike before. Combining the before and after, Mary just repeated Mike's previous proposal. What do you think of my new plan? After talking about her own plan, Mary looked at everyone expectantly. However, after hearing Mary's plan, everyone's faces were very strange, and their eyes also secretly looked at Mike. Obviously, everyone realized that Mary's plan was not a new plan. She completely stole Mike's idea. Seeing the atmosphere at the table gradually becoming awkward, George said against his will, it's a good plan, Mary. It can be seen that George still cares about his wife's feelings. However, the upright little Sheldon couldn't stand his father's behavior. He immediately asked, how is it good? George, who originally just wanted to make things right for his wife, was stunned by his youngest son's question. Grandma Connie, who was opposite, couldn't help laughing impolitely when she saw George's frustrated look. This time, the atmosphere was completely awkward. George, who was teased, glared at his youngest son with dissatisfaction. I understand the little Sheldon, who was glared at, said clearly, hello, she is good, you are good, everyone is good obviously. The smart little Sheldon was ironic his father and unconditionally supported his wife's behavior. Mary was also embarrassed by her youngest son's behavior. Later, she said with a stiff upper lip, okay, next I want to hear what good opinions you have on these 2 exhibition halls. I think Mr. Andy is very suitable for the haunted house. The performance effect of the last Annie stage play was very scary. Little Sheldon immediately suggested. Obviously, little Sheldon also saw Mr. Andy's performance with exposed leg hair in the best viewing area backstage last time. And Haunted House can be regarded as a variation of Hell House, and the most needed element is the horror element. Mr. Andy also won this opportunity for himself with a dedicated performance. Here, after being reminded by her youngest son, Mary also thought of the viewing experience of the last stage play, and couldn't help showing a look of disgust. No, Randy is not a good choice. He will ruin the church's activities. Mary immediately resisted. It can be seen that Mary attaches great importance to the church's Halloween event this time, and she doesn't want Randy's vulgar performance to appear in the activities she has planned. Why not? Isn't religion relying on intimidation and punishment to collect faith? Little Sheldon asked back. As mentioned earlier, little Sheldon once tried to establish the mathematics church, although he did not succeed in the end. However, that time also made him do a lot of in-depth research on religion. He found that the more disasters there are, the greater the demand for religion people have. It can be said that religion satisfies people's spiritual sustenance. In order for believers to have a strong centripetal force, some intimidation or punishment methods are needed. For example, rumors such as if a certain believer makes a mistake, he will go to the 18th level of hell can effectively regulate the behavior of believers. Hearing what her youngest son said, Mary retorted with disapproval. Christianity is different from other religions. The core is to talk about God loves the world. Therefore, God will not use intimidation and punishment to collect faith. As a devout believer, Mary firmly believes that God is the embodiment of beauty. Really? Little Sheldon obviously had a different understanding. He asked casually, if a Christian commits an unforgivable mistake, how will God treat him? Of course, he will go to hell and be burned by fire. Mary realized what she said after she finished speaking. It is obvious that God loves the world, but there is also a thunderous side. Then, Mary, who had been silent for a long time, finally realized that it might be a good choice to hand over the preparation of Haunted House to Mr. Andy. After all, the other party's performance is indeed scary enough. Okay, I will discuss the matter of Haunted House with Mr. Andy. After some thought, Mary agreed with her youngest son's proposal. Then, she continued, let's talk about Angel House. I already have a good plan here. Next, Mary told her plan. She planned to let the whole family dress up as angels and stay in the activity hall of Angel House to enlighten the lost people in the world. Sorry, I have an appointment that day, Grandma Connie said with a smile. John is said to have prepared a surprise for me. Read the correct version on the 16 to 9 book forum. In the past few weeks, Grandma Connie has been getting along well with Professor John, and the two are getting more and more like a couple. Seeing her mother's happy expression, Mary did not stop her from leaving. I also have a plan. I have an appointment with Dan, and we will go knock on doors together to ask for candy. Little Sheldon raised his hand to indicate. Trick or treat, if you don't give me candy. This is the hottest activity for American children on Halloween. It is rare to see her youngest son being lively. Mary smiled and did not stop him from leaving. I also had an appointment that day, little George said afterwards. In fact, little George did not have an appointment or any activities. He just thought that the church's Halloween activities would be boring, so he didn't want to participate. As for Mary, she didn't have much expectation for her eldest son to dress up as an angel. So, she also acquiesced to his withdrawal. Mary, I don't think I'm suitable to dress up as an angel, so. George patted his beer belly, very self-aware. Since he lost his job as a football coach, George has been drinking beer more and more frequently. Without body management, his beer belly has grown visibly. And because of stress, his white hair has become more and more obvious. This makes him look very bad. Mary looked at her husband and agreed, you are really not suitable to play an angel. Otherwise, you can be the angel's guard at the door. Hearing his wife's arrangement, George nodded and said with a smile, okay, I will protect my angel. Seeing her husband's sudden confession, Mary smiled knowingly. Then, she looked at Mike, who had been silent, and asked, Mike, you should be able to come over to help that day, right? In fact, Mary was also unsure about the plan of Angel House. Therefore, she really needed an eye-catching selling point. And the handsome Mike met this requirement. At least with him, he would definitely attract the attention of girls. Chapter 159 Preparation. Sorry, I think I have plans for that day. Mike started to decline. Although he didn't have any specific plans for Halloween yet. But with Katie and the other girls there, he would not be idle that day. Please, Mike. On Halloween, the church activities will only last until 12 o'clock in the evening, and you will have enough time for private activities afterwards. Mary was still unwilling to let go of Mike's trump card. Compared with other people in the family, Mike's importance to Mary's activities was obviously much higher. Who said he was a face genius? Looking at Mary's expectant expression, Mike thought for a while and said, well, I'll go back and think about it, and then I'll give you an answer. Mike actually wanted to discuss with Katie and the other girls first to see if the activities could be arranged after 12 o'clock. After all, Christmas has a whole night. Seeing Mike's relenting, Mary didn't rush too much. She smiled and said, I'll wait for your good news. Then, Mary's planned church Christmas activities were basically formed. So everyone started to enjoy dinner. At this time, Missy raised her hand and said dissatisfiedly, Mom, you haven't asked my opinion yet. The little girl was indeed ignored when everyone was discussing just now. Mary looked at her little daughter with a smile, and then asked in a flattering manner, so, Missy, are you willing to help your mother? Of course Missy, who was given enough attention, said with satisfaction, "I can dress up as a little angel and follow Mike." The little girl's straightforward speech caused a burst of good-natured laughter. After dinner, Mike also called Katie and others to discuss how to spend Halloween. Who knew that the girls of the Devil Body group seemed to have a plan in advance? They informed Mike that on Halloween, they would meet at Karen's house later and there would be a surprise. As for what the surprise was, no matter how Mike asked, the girls of the Devil Body group refused to reveal a single secret. Surprise? Mike, who couldn't guess the thoughts of the girls of the Devil Body group, shook his head and called Lina again. According to Lina, she needs to spend Halloween with her parents. So Mike can spend Halloween with him. He can go to the angel house to help first, and then go to Karen's house to meet the surprise. The next day, when Mike told Mary that he agreed to help, he was immediately dragged to the church. The church has a large venue for Halloween activities. Because of the activities in previous years, there is already a large-scale hell house here, and outside it is a large exhibition hall that can be used to raise funds for the church. So now, Mary only needs to change the name of Hell House and then build a Angel House venue next to it, and her plan will be complete. Mike's job today is mainly to measure his body shape and then have someone design a set of exclusive angel suits for him. Yes, Mary, who has regarded Mike as her trump card, attaches great importance to this link. Moreover, the expenses of this event will be reimbursed by the church, so Mary does not have too much burden to do things. Just when Mike measured the data and Mary was discussing with the costume designer how to design the style, Mr. Andy came over. "Mary, I think Haunted House is not as good as Hell House. I strongly request that the name be changed back." Mr. Andy is obviously a person with artistic pursuits, and in comparison, the previous name is indeed more intuitive and more attractive. "No, I'm the general planner of this event. I have to be responsible for it," Mary said toughly, as if she would change someone else if it couldn't be done. "Okay, you are the boss." Mr. Andy gave in. "But soon," he said excitedly, "I plan to divide the activities over there into 7 units and carry them out according to the model of the 7 deadly sins. The 7 deadly sins: pride, jealousy, anger, laziness, greed, gluttony and lust." It must be said that Mr. Andy is indeed an artist, and his brain is useful. In his plan, he will use the most realistic scenes of the 7 deadly sins to let the people who come to watch feel the horror of these crimes firsthand. Your idea is very good. After listening to the other party's overall plan, Mary was convinced. However, in the end, she still suggested, "Actually, the scene doesn't have to be so real." The 7 deadly sins sounded scary. If it was too real, Mary was afraid that it would scare the children again. Why? Mr. Andy, who was very artistic, didn't understand Mary's idea. "Let me put it this way," Mary explained. "I heard that in previous Halloween events, some women who participated in the performance became pregnant because of performing pornography. So, I don't want this kind of situation to happen in the activities I organize." Hearing such explosive news, Mr. Andy was also very surprised. Then, he said, "Okay, your reason convinced me. I will let the actors this year restrain a little." After making a promise, Mr. Andy was about to leave and suddenly saw the handsome Mike next to him. As the instructor of the school drama club, Randy also knew Mike, a popular figure in the school. So, he warmly invited, "Mike, are you interested in participating in my performance? I have a role that is very suitable for you. A correct version in the 16-9 book bar." Judging from his appearance, it is very likely that he wants Mike to perform pornography there. With Mike's face, he only needs a little bit of performance to arouse the ladies' fantasies. Here, without waiting for Mike to refuse, Mary said first, "Randy, don't even think about it. Mike is the person I specially invited to play the angel." "That's a pity." Mr. Andy looked disappointed. Then he said, "But he is indeed quite suitable to play the angel. Otherwise, I will design a few actions for him." This time, Mike and Mary did not refuse his kindness. And Randy is indeed worthy of being a drama club teacher. He explained to Mike the cultivation required by an actor from all aspects of facial expressions and body movements. Performance plus 66. Performance plus 55. Mike crushed several skill light balls picked up from Mr. Andy. As a result, he couldn't help but look up to this drama club teacher who didn't look very good. The other party is indeed a capable person. You know, the last time Mike picked up so many skill light balls, it was from the color changing star. Coincidentally, Mike also picked up a lot of performance experience that time. As a result, his current acting skills have reached the middle of the second level, which is a level that can be performed on stage. On the other hand, Mr. Andy was also surprised by Mike's acting talent. He asked with fiery eyes, "Mike, have you studied acting before?" "No, but I know a little bit." Mike made up an excuse. "It doesn't matter if you haven't, it's not too late now." Mr. Andy was like looking at a rough jade and invited again. "Would you like to join my drama club in school? Believe me, you only need a little effort and you will definitely become a great performing artist." Drama performance? This made Mike think of Randa's eye-catching performance on the drama stage last time. Moreover, even if there was no such experience, Mike was not very interested in studying acting. So he refused. "Thank you for your invitation, Mr. Andy. However, I didn't think about studying acting." Oh, what a pity seeing the rough jade in front of him, but unable to carve it. Mr. Andy couldn't help but sigh heavily. The last time he was so emotional was when little Sheldon quit the drama club. Chapter 160 Creation. "Mike, are you interested in watching my rehearsal?" Although he was rejected twice in a row, Mr. Andy still did not give up and planned to pull Mike into the drama club. He only thought that if he could get in touch with Mike more and let him see the charm of acting, maybe he would change his mind. After seeing Mr. Andy's enthusiasm, Mike also had some of his own thoughts. From the current situation, Mr. Andy, who has always been full of enthusiasm, is the person who is most likely to contribute skills and experience at this stage. Although the acting skill is not very useful to Mike, who would dislike knowing more. As the saying goes, more skills are better. Seeing Mike's gaze, Mary smiled and said, "If you want to go over there and take a look. We don't need your help here anymore." Mike's data has been measured, and the costume design has basically been finalized. So he continued to stay at Angel House, and there was really nothing to do. "Please follow me. I'll take you to see my new show. You won't be disappointed." Mr. Andy also saw that Mike was thinking about something, so he took him to Haunted House while the iron was hot. Mr. Andy had already divided Haunted House into 7 compartments. Each compartment had several actors who were temporarily pulled from the street. It can be seen that Mr. Andy had already had a complete plan for his program before he went to find Mary. Starting from the arrogance unit, Mr. Andy deliberately made up a small plot for each unit in front of Mike to better show the 7 deadly sins. Next, after his brief training, the temporary actors were able to perform their own plots in a very good manner. "What do you think of my show, Mike?" After arranging 7 small plots in a row, Mr. Andy asked with a little pride on his face. Mr. Andy was really proud of being able to complete the program so quickly, and it looked decent. "It's okay," Mike replied reservedly. In fact, he was sighing in his heart. Mr. Andy's professionalism. It was just because Mike had picked up a lot of performance experience from Mr. Andy in the past period of time. Now his performance skills have successfully reached level 3, reaching the threshold of professional actors. By analogy, Mike can now directly play the leading role in some idol dramas or soap TV series. So from a certain perspective, Mr. Andy's professionalism in acting is even more professional than George's level in football. After all, when Mike and George learned football, it took a long time to raise their football skills to level 3. Here, Mr. Andy saw Mike's indifferent reaction and thought that the other party was questioning his professionalism. So, he said, "The program is not complete now. When it is matched with background music in the future, the effect will definitely be better." Mr. Andy, who was only thinking about how to pull Mike into the drama club, never thought that the other party's performance was so indifferent because he wanted to get more wool from him. Then, Mr. Andy continued, "It just so happens that I have some inspiration for the background music of the show. Now, let's go and compose it." As a performer, Mr. Andy has a crazy energy. Next, Mr. Andy, who has full execution ability, took Mike to a makeshift music room. This music room is not big, and the environment is not good, but there are all the necessary instruments. Soon, Mr. Andy, who entered the working state, forgot about Mike's existence. He first composed a few short pieces of music on the draft paper, and then tried to play them on different instruments. Music plus 88. Music plus 66. Looking at Mr. Andy, who kept scribbling and revising in front of the instrument, Mike, who got a lot of experience like groups, was reacquainted with this leg-hairy drama club teacher. In terms of art, the other party is definitely a real genius. And with the continuous accumulation of experience like groups, Mike's music level soon reached level 2. The music level here not only includes singing skills, but also the ability to compose music. In addition to Mike's original characteristics of memory palace and absolute pitch. If he wanted to, he could become a creative genius in the field of music with a complicated music library in his mind. Time went on until the afternoon, and Mary's arrival interrupted Mr. Andy's creation. Is lunch over? Mr. Andy scratched his dangerous hairline, and then looked at Mike, who had been with him for the whole morning, and said awkwardly, "Sorry, I was too focused just now. You missed dinner time." "Yes, Mary came here to call Mike home for dinner. It doesn't matter. I think it's worth it to see a wonderful live creation process," Mike said with a smile. In fact, he now has a little respect for Mr. Andy, who has been concentrating on creation for the whole morning. Seeing Mike's expression, Mr. Andy also smiled with relief. Then, seeing that the situation is suitable, he still did not forget his original intention, and invited Mike again to join his drama club. "I'll think about it again." This time, Mike did not refuse directly. A perfect version of the book in 1619. You should think about your situation carefully. Mr. Andy also realized that Mike had very good grades in both study and sports at school. And for an all-rounder like Mike, if he wants to plan his future path, he really needs to think about it carefully. People are afraid of entering the wrong industry, and this applies everywhere. After that, after saying goodbye to Mr. Andy, who still had to continue to create, Mike went home with Mary to have lunch. As for joining the school drama club, Mike was just being polite to Mr. Andy before. The route of musicians or artists has never been within Mike's consideration. In his opinion, these professions are okay as hobbies when he is free, but forget about being a main job. In the next few days, Mr. Andy, who had created the background music, would call Mike to watch his rehearsal when he was free. And the performance of the 7 Deadly Sins, with the background music, the atmosphere was indeed much better. Time flew by, and it was Halloween. In the streets of the town, there were many more horror elements in response to the festive atmosphere. Residents also put up pumpkin lanterns at their doors, some hideous or cute. On Mary's side, because she was responsible for the Halloween activities after the church, the Cooper family's dinner was much earlier. It is worth mentioning that Grandma Connie did not attend this family dinner because of her date with Professor John. At the Cooper family, when Mary served the last pumpkin pie, little Sheldon also dressed himself up and walked out. "Shelly, come and eat," Mary urged her little son, who was deliberately showing off in the restaurant. "Don't you see who I am?" Little Sheldon, who attracted everyone's attention, turned around and asked like a little adult. Today's look was carefully designed by little Sheldon. At this time, he was wearing a blue turtleneck sweater inside and a brown suit outside. The shiny 3:7 oily hair and the shiny leather shoes made him look very mature. "You are dressed like this?" Little George thought for a while and said with a bad taste, "Is it an evil scientist?" Little Sheldon, who had a little fantasy about little George, rolled his eyes after hearing the other party's speech and said, "No." Chapter 161 Candy. After looking down on George, Sheldon put his hands in front of him, showed up again, and looked at his family with expectation. Then, after finding that everyone had a blank look on their faces, Sheldon shook his head in disappointment. Then, he looked at Mike and asked, "Mike, do you know who I'm playing today?" "It's Carl Sagan," Mike said. "Congratulations. The answer is completely correct." Sheldon cheered happily, and then sat down at the dining table with satisfaction. "Carl Sagan? Who is that?" George asked curiously. "The host of the Planet column," Mike explained casually. But when he saw that George was still confused, he thought about it and continued. Carl Sagan is a very knowledgeable person. He has made great achievements in humanities, geography, environment and other subjects. Well, although Mike explained more about Carl Sagan, George still had a blank expression on his face. It was indeed a bit difficult for George, a person with learning difficulties, to understand academic experts. On the other hand, Sheldon was very satisfied with Mike's answer. He said, Carl Sagan is a great man. He is my idol now. Since Peggy despised the proton professor in the science column last time, Sheldon has found a new TV idol for himself. Carl Sagan in the planet column is young and knowledgeable, which just meets Sheldon's requirements. Isn't your idol Hawking? George asked again in surprise. I can have many idols. Although Carl Sagan is not as good as Stephen Hawking in my heart, Carl can barely be my idol in terms of erudition. Sheldon said proudly. Is this okay? George was confused by Sheldon and scratched his head funny, as if he was going to grow a brain. In fact, it was already difficult for George to remember Hawking, a celebrity in the scientific community. Okay, let's eat. There are still many things waiting for us next. Mary glared at her eldest son who was making fun of her and urged him unhappily. As the planner of the church's Halloween event, Mary is under a lot of pressure now. Just when the family was about to finish dinner, someone knocked on the door. Mike, who was closest to the door, took the initiative to open the door. Trick or treat, if you don't give me candy. Three children in strange costumes shouted happily at the door. Well, Dan is not really a child. You are the flower fairy, Mike said to the little girl Barbie next door. Today, Barbie wore a pink dress with small wings, a glittering tentacles hairpin on her head, and a small flower-shaped lantern in her hand. It is not difficult to guess the role she plays with her cute and unique outfit. I'm the flower fairy. Barbie happily squatted like a lady after being guessed to play the role. In fact, on Halloween, it is a great affirmation to be guessed by others to play the role. You are Superman, Mike then said to the kid next door, Billy, with a blue and red tights, underwear worn outside, and a handsome cape behind him. The role Billy plays is also easy to guess. I'm Superman. Billy smiled, then put one hand across his body, raised the other hand with a fist, and made a classic Superman flying move, flying in a circle. Although Billy is fat, he is not suitable for tights. But he looks very energetic now. You are. Mike looked at Dan next to him, thought for a while and asked, Gandalf in black robe, or Principal Dumbledore? Dan was wearing a black robe with a wide-brimmed wizard hat, a long white beard on his face, and a small stick in his hand. With this mixed style, Mike was really unsure who the other party was playing. I want to play Gandalf in white robe, but I haven't found the right white wizard robe and long wand. Dan said awkwardly. Well, your white beard is actually very similar to Gandalf. Mike praised him very face-savingly. Candy. Candy. At this time, Billy and his sister, whose identities were guessed, began to make a fuss. Just when Mike was embarrassed, Mary came over. She smiled and said, I'm sorry, we don't have any candy today. How about pumpkin pie? Mary shared the pumpkin pie in her hand with the three people outside the door. After receiving the gifts, Billy and his sister calmed down. In fact, it is not necessary to give children candy after knocking on the door on Halloween. Small snacks, toys, souvenirs, etc. can meet their requirements. I'm not here to ask for gifts. Is Sheldon home? Dan asked stiffly. The reason why he came to Cooper's house today was because he had an appointment with little Sheldon in advance. Shelly is eating. Why don't you come in and wait for a while, and you can also taste the apple pie I made? Mary invited. She had a good impression of Dan, an honest child. No, I can wait at the door for a while. Dan, on his side, was still a little afraid of Mary because of the last board game. A correct version in a book bar on 16:9. Little Sheldon at the dining table had already noticed Dan's arrival, so as not to keep him waiting for a long time. He quickly stuffed the apple pie on the plate in front of him into his mouth, and then came to the door. I'm done. Because there was still food in his mouth, Sheldon said incoherently, we can go after that. Sheldon mixed into the team of Billy and the other two. If it was normal, Mary would definitely scold Sheldon for not eating well. But on this special holiday today, it was rare to see her youngest son so happy, so she didn't say much. After waving to the 4 children, she watched them leave. Then, Mary, who had finished her dinner quickly, also called Mike and others to rush to the church event venue. You know, before the church event starts, several people still need to spare time to make their looks. On the way to the church, before it got dark, all kinds of people dressed strangely were already wandering on the street. Here, you can see the devil and the angel, arm in arm, but in a very harmonious scene. Moreover, these people dressed strangely are also happy to interact with pedestrians on the road. When Mike and others crossed the obstruction of the demons and monsters along the way, and came to the door of the church, Mary looked at George, who had followed, and asked, "George, didn't you say you had something to do today?" I do have something to do, so I'll leave first." George smiled awkwardly and turned to blend into the crowd on the street. Looking at her eldest son's hurried departure, Mary shook her head slightly, as if she had guessed something. Just as Mike and his friends entered the Halloween venue prepared by the classroom, with a strange laugh, a demon with horns on his head emerged from the smoke. "Welcome to hell." The demon had a ferocious expression on his face and his voice was eerie and terrifying. Mary was startled by the other party's performance, and then said dissatisfiedly, "Stop it, Randy, we're in a hurry." Yes, the demon who blocked the road was Mr. Andy, who had arrived first and dressed up. Today, he was responsible for the important task of taking guests to appreciate the 7 deadly sins. How about it? My Satan look. Mr. Andy, who was recognized, restored his original voice. Mr. Andy, wearing a black leather jacket, with heavy devil makeup on his face and a long spiked whip in his hand, looks really intimidating. Chapter 162 Redemption. After bidding farewell to the enthusiastic Mr. Andy, Mike and his friends went to the dressing room of Angel House. In the men's dressing room, George, who had put on his guard uniform in a few seconds, looked at Mike, who was dressed in a gorgeous angel costume, and couldn't help but muttered in a low voice, "This is not fair." Mike's pure white angel suit, which was specially designed, had huge feather wings on the back, and an angel halo was hung on his head by a headband. The gorgeous outfit matched Mike's handsome face, and he looked like an angel from a myth. In contrast to Mike's outfit, George, in addition to a simple half-body leather armor, only had the rough spear in his hand, which made him look more like a gift. In George's resenting eyes, Mike quickly put on his outfit and went outside with him. In the corridor, Mary and her daughter just came out of the women's dressing room. The style of their outfits was a bit similar to Mike's. It's just that the wings behind are smaller, and the details of the clothes are not so sophisticated. Seeing his wife and little daughter dressed gorgeously, George looked at his simple leather armor again and said sourly, "You should be a family." Hearing the teasing in her husband's tone, Mary smiled and stroked his protruding belly, and said with a smile, "Who told you to be just a guard?" George, who knew that he was not suitable for the angel costume, was silenced by his wife's words. On the other side, after seeing Mike's very handsome look, Missy walked around him several times with her short legs and cheered, "Mike, you are so handsome today." Receiving the sincere compliment from the little girl, Mike smiled, then looked at her and said, "Our little angel Missy is also very cute today." With the white angel suit and the small wings on her back, Mrs. current appearance is indeed very cute. "Thank you, Missy." Thanked Mike like a lady, and then cheered happily in the corridor. "Missy is a little angel, okay, Missy? We should go in and prepare." Seeing that the time was almost up, Mary called her little daughter to stop playing around, and led a few people into the venue of Angel's house. The pure white room was dotted with white clouds, and the background wall was painted with huge pictures of the Son of God, the Virgin Mary, and the Holy Spirit. At first glance, it really felt like heaven. After entering the door, Mary and Mike sat at the left and right ends, only 5 meters apart. What if no one likes the angel's house I designed? Mary, who sat down, whispered to her husband behind her. Although she had made a lot of preparations before, when it came to the moment of acceptance of the results, Mary, the planner, couldn't help but worry. "It's okay, the event has just started, and people will come." George, who was wearing a guard uniform, whispered to comfort his wife. Then, he said affirmatively, "Don't forget, we still have Mike as our trump card." In fact, during the time when the two were talking, Someone in the corridor had already noticed the handsome Mike. Not long after that, several young girls pushed each other to come to Mike. Of course, they were not here to pray, but to covet Mike's beauty. The girls chattered around Mike. Some asked for his name and other information, and some wanted his contact information. Mike, on his side, always had a polite and distant smile on his face, nodding from time to time to deal with the girls in front of him. Of course, if the girls were more beautiful, Mike might show a more enthusiastic side. There is no way, who is not a member of the Appearance Association. On the other side, Mary, who was less than 5 meters away from Mike, also heard the girls' speeches. She frowned and said, they don't want to come to confess at all. The purpose of Mary's hosting of Angel's House is to help some people who need salvation. Obviously, this group of girls who just came in did not meet her requirements. Be patient, Mary, the event has just begun. Wait a minute, there will always be people who need help coming in. George continued to comfort his impatient wife. In fact, as soon as the church's Halloween event started, a large number of tourists entered. But compared to the ordinary Angel House, more people chose to go to the more exciting haunted house. At this time, Mr. Andy was very busy. He dressed up as Satan and was leading a group of audiences to visit the 7 deadly sins huts he designed. On the other side, little George was wandering aimlessly on the street. Suddenly, he saw a beautiful girl with a depressed look on the bench in the corner of the road. "Hi, beautiful lady, do you need help?" Little George walked over and asked gentlemanly. Veronica heard the voice, looked up at little George twice, shook her head and said, "Thank you, no. I just want to be alone for a while." Veronica, who comes from a single parent family, had a big fight with her father today because of her boyfriend, and then ran away from home. After leaving home, she thought she could spend an unforgettable Halloween with her boyfriend. As a result, when she found her boyfriend, she saw him from a distance, holding the arm of another girl in a close relationship. Read the correct version in the 16:9 book forum. This is exactly why Veronica is depressed now. Little George saw that the girl was in a bad mood, and he said meaningfully, "Maybe I can take you to do something happy." Veronica understood the underlying meaning of little George, and immediately had the idea of revenge on her boyfriend. However, she still asked knowingly, "Then what do you want to take me to do?" Little George didn't want to say it too bluntly. He thought about it and suggested, "I can take you to the movies first, and then we can have some private activities. Today is Halloween, and the movies shown in the cinema must be horror movies." Little George, who was a little thoughtful, was already thinking about the scene in the cinema, where the girl got into his arms in fear. In terms of George's appearance, he was several levels lower than Mike. But among ordinary people, he was pretty good. Veronica, who was rebellious, looked at George for several more times and agreed, "Okay, let's go to the cinema." In this way, George successfully made an appointment with the girl. So, under his leadership, the two walked towards the cinema. "What is going on there?" Veronica asked, staring at the crowded crowd at the door when passing by the church. "Oh, the church's Halloween event. My mother is the planner," George said casually. It can be seen that he really wants to show off in front of the girl. "Really? Then let's go and have a look." Veronica is now in a state of confusion and needs a spiritual sustenance. Wait, seeing that his private date was about to be ruined, George wanted to hold the girl. But before he could say more, the girl had already gone to the door of the church. Veronica, who came to the event site, looked at the signs of Angel House and Haunted House on the left and right, turned around and asked, "Your mother is the planner. Which side do you think we should go to?" George reacted quickly. He realized that there was Mike in Angel House and the girl couldn't see him. So he said, "It looks like the haunted house is more interesting. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels." Chapter 163 Redemption, continued. At this time, Mr. Andy, dressed as Satan, had just finished receiving a group of tourists. With a strange laugh, he returned to the door from the smoke. After waving the whip in his hand exaggeratedly, Mr. Andy lowered his voice and said to the new tourists at the door, "Welcome to Haunted House. I'm your guide Satan." The appropriate background music, coupled with Mr. Andy's hard work, immediately caught everyone's attention. To some extent, there is a reason why there are not many people in Angel's house. Compared with the ordinary confession mode over there, Mr. Andy's side is obviously more interesting. Please follow me. I will take you to know the sins of mankind. After attracting everyone's attention, Mr. Andy continued to lower his voice and led people to the small theater. Little George also followed Veronica's steps and walked towards Haunted House. At this time, he almost tripped because he didn't notice the obstacle under his feet. Fortunately, Mr. Andy was quick to help George. Then, he kindly reminded everyone, "Please be careful and don't trip over the wires next." Everyone, led by Mr. Andy, visited the 7 deadly sins from the Pride Theater. The interesting stories, accompanied by the explanation of Satan, gradually immersed everyone in it. Of course, George was not among them. His attention was always on Veronica. As George kept chatting with her, he finally learned a lot of information about Veronica. For example, the other party was from a single-parent family and was also a student of Melford and was in the 12th grade this year. Just when George thought that he and Veronica were getting closer and closer, Mr. Andy also led everyone to the last unit of sex. Mr. Andy, sex is the most primitive impulse of human beings, but excessive sex will spread. It will ruin your life. Veronica, who had given herself to strangers because she wanted to take revenge on her boyfriend, suddenly woke up after listening to Mr. Andy's explanation and felt scared. Thinking of the disastrous consequences of pornography, the girl was surrounded by great fear. Then, in the surprised eyes of little George, Veronica rushed out of the haunted house regardless, and then followed the signs to the Angel House. In the Angel House, more girls gathered on Mike's side, and even the little angel Missy was squeezed out of place. However, as I said, none of these chirping girls came to pray and confess. Looking at their appearance, you can tell that they all came for Mike's appearance. Is my event planning this time a failure? Mary, who was alone in front of her, said disappointedly. The current situation in the Angel House is completely different from what she thought before. Mike, as the ace, has indeed attracted a lot of people here, but these people are not what Mary wants. Wait a little longer. George in the back comforted his wife again. Just looking at his expression, it seems that he is not very optimistic about the confession event held by his wife. At this time, Veronica, with a sad expression on her face, stumbled into the Angel House. Judging from the girl's current state, she is in great need of help. As the girl approached, Mary, who had been waiting for a long time, adjusted her sitting position and showed a faint smile on her face. But when Veronica was about to walk in front of Mary, the girl suddenly saw the handsome Mike in the crowd on the other side. Then, under Mary's expectant gaze, Veronica turned a corner and went straight to Mike. Why is this happening? The smile on Mary's face rose. She was even thinking that asking Mike to come over to help might not be a good idea. George, who was standing behind, didn't know how to comfort his wife for her disappointment this time. On the other side, Veronica pushed through the crowd and threw herself at Mike's feet, confessing sadly, "I'm guilty. I shouldn't humiliate myself because of the mistakes made by others." After feeling Mike's gentle gaze, the girl continued, "I shouldn't have conflicts with my family. I know my father is doing this for my own good." Listening to the girl's confession, Mike avoided the other party's attempt to grab his hand, and then said with a holy smile, "God will forgive you." At this moment, Mike seemed to be emitting light, which stunned the girls around him, and little George, who happened to rush to the door, also happened to see the scene where Veronica was fascinated by Mike. A heartbreaking voice sounded. Little George knew that his date today was gone. He turned around and left in disappointment. From this moment on, he no longer believed in God. It was also from this moment that little George became a staunch atheist like little Sheldon. What's wrong with him? Pastor Jeff, dressed as a voluptuous dancer, happened to come to the door of Angel's house and saw the back of little George leaving. "Forget it. I'd better go tell Mary and the others the good news." After shaking his head, Pastor Jeff walked straight into the Angel's house. Yes, Pastor Jeff came here from the fundraising site in the hall specifically to tell Mary that the event she organized this time was very successful and attracted a lot of sponsorship for the church. Mary, we succeeded. Do you know how much sponsorship the church raised this time? Pastor Jeff walked in front of Mary with a charming step. Since his second marriage with Robin, Pastor Jeff, who lives a happy life, has become more and more relaxed. No, this event was not successful. Mary tried her best to ignore the other party's eye-catching appearance and said disappointedly, "A perfect version in 1619 book 1 bar. Why not?" Pastor Jeff didn't understand what Mary meant. He continued happily, "You don't know how much money we raised this time. It's not a matter of money." Mary was still upset that no one came to her to confess. "It's a matter of money. Money can make God care for his believers better." After Pastor Jeff explained, he walked back and continued, "There are still many believers in the hall waiting for me to entertain them. I'll leave first." Looking at Pastor Jeff's still charming back, Mary looked away with disdain. "By the way, Mary." Pastor Jeff walked to the door and suddenly stopped, picked a bunch of grapes from the accessories on his head, and threw them to Mary, saying with a smile, "This is a reward for your work, huh?" Mary, who received the grapes, waited for Pastor Jeff to disappear, and quickly threw the grapes to her husband behind her. Time passed little by little, until 12 o'clock. Mary didn't receive even a single customer, which made her very depressed. On Mike's side, after persuading Veronica, who was nagging and confessing, to go home, he considered to have completed all his work for the day. Then, dressed in a gorgeous angel costume, he left the church and walked towards Karen's house. There, it is said that there is a surprise waiting for him. On the other side, little Sheldon also followed Dan and the other two and knocked on the doors of many residents. It's just a pity that all the people who opened the door failed to recognize the role played by Sheldon, which made him feel very disappointed. Don't be sad, Sheldon. In fact, many people have called me by my wrong identity. Dan tried to comfort Sheldon. It's different. Sheldon shook his head and said seriously, "Your dress is not professional at all. It's normal for someone to mistake you for Dumbledore." Yes, Dan's wizard mix and match outfit made many people guess his identity wrong. However, even if he was mistaken for Dumbledore, Dan still received a lot of small gifts. And the Billy brothers and sisters next to him, because their identities were easy to guess, they gained a lot this night. Only Sheldon, who had never been recognized, was still empty-handed. "Okay, let's knock on the door one last time. Maybe this time, the other party will recognize you." The kind Dan continued to comfort Sheldon. "That's the only way." Sheldon nodded mechanically. In fact, he no longer had any hope of being recognized. "Trick or treat, if you don't give me candy." X44 children knocked on the door of a very remote house. A lady in her 50s wearing glasses opened the door. When she saw little Sheldon, her eyes lit up and she asked, "Are you Carl Sagan Jr.? You look so much like him." One thing is certain, this elderly lady must have studied science. When he heard the other party's words, the smile on Sheldon's face slowly faded. Then, he raised his arms and cheered on the street, as if he had accomplished a feat. Chapter 164. One more person. When Mike arrived at Karen's door, it was already dark. Devil lanterns were hung on the street, and countless people dressed strangely were experiencing a carnival under the lights and moonlight. Here, Mike tidied up his clothes and knocked on Karen's door. Not long after, the door of the villa opened a crack. Then, Karen reached out and pulled Mike in. Because it was Halloween, Karen had a pair of curved horns on her head and dressed herself up as a dark succubus. The tight little leather armor made her good figure almost come out. Sure enough, big is justice, and girls with good figures look good in anything. After seeing Mike's gorgeous angel costume, Karen also showed an obsessed expression, and soon she was about to stick to him. Wait, Mike separated the girl with superhuman self-control and asked, "Are your parents not at home?" You know, before Mike entered the door, he was still thinking about giving Karen's parents a good impression. They went out to have a world of two. Karen said proudly. Karen's parents were originally going to spend Halloween with their daughter at home. As a result, under the girl's strong suggestion, Karen's parents, who had been busy with work all year, decided to take advantage of today to relax and have a happy world for two. In this way, the girl got the right to use the villa tonight. On the other side, when Mike heard that Karen's parents were not at home, he didn't pretend. Let me, an angel, punish you, a devil with great evil. Mike took the initiative to attack and controlled the devil's great evil. Karen, who was unable to resist, begged for mercy after being manipulated. Wait a minute, don't you want to know what surprise we have prepared for you today? Isn't this a surprise? Mike smiled and looked at the girl who was soft. You know, role-playing gave Mike a lot of stimulation and made him very interested. Of course not. Karen glared at Mike with a thready look in her eyes and got out of the other's clutches. Mike also realized that in addition to Karen, Katie and Regina had also asked him to come here before. Where are they? Mike asked. Come with me, I'll take you to see the surprise tonight, Karen said, motioning Mike to follow. The two soon came to a dark side hall. Under the shadows, a figure could be seen flashing inside. This is it. We decided to play a game of eagle catches chicken with you tonight, Karen said, flashing into the dark room and inviting. Come and catch us. There will be rewards if you catch us. Hey, don't say. The girls in the devil figure group have many tricks. I'm coming. Mike, who was completely interested, shouted and rushed into the dim room. Then, bursts of girls' screams came from the room. However, the girls didn't know that Mike, who had the moonlight characteristic, also had the ability of night vision. With the faint moonlight from the window, Mike could clearly see that several girls in the room were wearing the same succubus outfit as Karen. The same outfit, worn by different girls, has completely different styles. Of course, one thing is certain, they are all charming. Just 1, 2, 3, 4. What Mike didn't expect was that besides Karen and the other two girls, Gretchen was also here. Dressed as a succubus, this girl with a scholarly temperament was even more charming at this moment. I'm here. Karen suddenly ran to Gretchen in the corner and sent a signal to Mike. Then, when she was about to be caught, Karen pulled Gretchen and pushed her into Mike's arms. Gretchen, who was suddenly held in Mike's arms, subconsciously exclaimed. Then, as if she was afraid that the other party would hear her identity, the girl quickly covered her mouth. At this time, seeing the girl's face flushed and trying to restrain herself, Mike suddenly felt a surge of primitive power. The meat has been delivered to his mouth. There is no reason not to eat it. Charm attribute plus 20, physique main attribute plus 1, skin attribute plus 5. At the same time, a candlelight dinner for two was being held on the roof of Professor John's house. Connie, are you satisfied with today's date? Professor John, who had finished his steak by himself, asked with a smile, while wiping his mouth with a napkin. Not bad. After looking at Professor John across from her, Grandma Connie asked, what's next? What plans do you have? On a day like today, the candlelight dinner prepared by Professor John was romantic enough. However, in Grandma Connie's opinion, the other party still lacked a little interest. What's next? Professor John's brain was a little short-circuited. In his mind, shouldn't he be in a shameless world of two people next? A correct version in 1619 book bar. Yes, today is Halloween. Don't you have any other plans? Grandma Connie asked, looking at the complicated night scene on the street. As mentioned earlier, at Grandma Connie's level, she no longer has too many requirements for material things, but instead pursues spiritual comfort. In a vague way, she was dissatisfied with Professor John, who didn't understand romance tonight. Professor John also saw that Grandma Connie seemed not very satisfied with Halloween with only candlelight dinner. How about? Professor John thought for a while and suggested, I can teach you a set of health-preserving boxing here. Health-preserving boxing? Grandma Connie showed a surprised look. She didn't quite understand the other party's train of thought. Yes, this set of boxing is very precious and can make people younger. The more Professor John talked, the more reliable he felt. Isn't it interesting to learn boxing on the rooftop? Okay, let's try it. Although Grandma Connie still didn't understand the other party's train of thought, but seeing Professor John's confident look, she also became interested. Then, accompanied by the lights on the street below and the faint moonlight above their heads, the two of them practiced health-preserving exercises on the roof. Later, as the two got closer and closer, Grandma Connie gradually realized the fun of health-preserving exercises. Open air, wild, Who said that Professor John didn't understand romance? He obviously knew how to do it. On the other side, Karen took advantage of the break time and quietly turned on the light in the room. Looking at the chaotic scene in the room, several girls, although they were mentally prepared, still couldn't help but cover their faces in surprise. "We are all family. Why are you shy?" Karen said with a very open attitude. Then, she walked to Gretchen and pulled the girl's hand away. At the same time, Mike also cooperated and showed an appropriate look of surprise. "Gretchen, why are you here too?" Gretchen was stared at by Mike, and she shyly wanted to find a gap to hide immediately. Yes, for today's surprise, Karen also dragged the other party to meet Gretchen's wish. Gretchen, who had already had thoughts in mind, agreed half-heartedly in a rush. Now, she just felt that she was too ashamed to see Mike. "Mike, things have come to this point. What do you say we should do?" Karen showed a teasing look and spoke up for her bestie. "What else can we do?" Mike smiled and said, "Anyway, we are all family." Chapter 165 Holy Water Baptism. The next morning, when Mike was driven back by Regina, he happened to meet Grandma Connie, who was also returning home. After watching Regina leave, Grandma Connie looked at Mike, who was still full of energy, and couldn't help but sigh. "It's good to be young." Mike looked at Grandma Connie, smiled and said nothing. The game last night was really crazy. If Mike's physique was not strong enough, he might not be able to withstand the 4 succubi. It is worth mentioning that Gretchen, a girl who looks a bit bookish, did not perform worse than the other 3 girls after tasting the forbidden fruit for the first time. As Halloween ended, Mike's life returned to its previous rhythm. Of course, there was one more girl he needed to take time to deal with. On this Friday, when Mike packed up and prepared to go home, he was blocked at the door of the classroom again. "Mike, are you free tomorrow?" Veronica invited with a smile. "There will be a holy water baptism in the church tomorrow morning. We can attend together." This girl named Veronica was the one who sincerely confessed to Mike in Angel House last Halloween. Since then, the girl has been attracted to the handsome Mike. During this week, she would take the initiative to approach Mike whenever she was free. Mike knew the girl's thoughts very well. However, in terms of appearance, the girl could only get 7 points at most, and her flat body did not win her any extra points. Compared with Karen and others who were both beautiful and had good figures, Veronica was indeed far behind in all aspects. "I have something to do tomorrow." Mike refused calmly. Before, Mike had formally refused the other party several times, but the effect was not very good. Veronica's eyes darkened after being rejected again. But soon, she smiled again and said, "What about the day after tomorrow? Do you have time to go to the movies together? I just happen to have 2 movie tickets here." With the girl's humble performance, many classmates who were happy to watch the fun gradually gathered around. Listening to the increasing number of discussions around him, Mike realized that he needed to dispel the other party's thoughts once and for all. Otherwise, it would not be good for anyone if Veronica continued to pester him like this. While Mike was preparing to say something harsh, Regina came over with several girls from the Devil Body group. After this period of training, the girls became more charming and attracted attention wherever they went. "Veronica, do you have something to do with Mike?" Regina now regained her former demeanor as the queen bee. As a 12th grade student, Regina naturally discovered some of Veronica's little tricks. She brought all the members of the Devil Body group this time, obviously intending to assert her sovereignty. "No, it's okay." Veronica's momentum was suppressed. Looking at the beautiful and eye-catching members of the Devil Body group in front of her, she felt a little ashamed. "It's good that you're okay." Regina glanced at the other party casually, then turned to Mike and said, "Do you want to go together?" Obviously, in the mind of the queen bee, Veronica, who was ordinary in all aspects, was not qualified to be her opponent. This was exactly the case. The moment Regina appeared, Veronica lost. Mike, of course, followed Regina and the others, and walked out of the school. Only the lost Veronica was left in the corridor, accepting the pointing and talking of the students around her. I believe that after this incident, she will not come to Mike again. "Veronica, are you okay?" Little George, who had been hiding nearby and observing the situation, came over to comfort the lost girl after seeing Mike and the others walk away. Obviously, little George also knew in which situation he could get the girl's favor the most. I'm fine. Veronica shook her head woodenly, not yet recovered from the blow. I heard that you are going to receive the holy water baptism in the church tomorrow. I can go with you. Little George took the initiative to find a topic. Sure enough, after hearing what little George said, Veronica raised her head. She was confused about life and needed a spiritual sustenance. Veronica, who had decided to become a Christian, asked, "Are you ready to become a believer too?" From the last contact, the girl already knew that little George was not a Christian. George, who was already an atheist, decided to lie for the sake of his lifelong happiness. He stared at Veronica and said affectionately, "Yes, I have decided to join Christianity." But the girl obviously did not understand the deep meaning of George's words. She only knew that it might be a good experience to have someone she knew to join Christianity with her. So, Veronica smiled and said, "Okay, George. See you tomorrow morning." "See you tomorrow." George watched the other party leave absent-mindedly. Obviously, he was fascinated by the girl's last smile. On the other side, Regina, who accompanied Mike to the door, invited, "Will you come to my house tomorrow? We can have another private party." After saying that, the queen bee also flirted with a flirtatious look. A correct version of the book in 1619. Several girls from the devil figure group on the side also looked at Mike, waiting for his answer. Obviously, the last game gave them a good gaming experience. I have to praise here that the Moonlight feature is really awesome. I'm afraid it won't work tomorrow. I have other things to do. Mike said. Are you going to Lina's place? Regina said with a smile. Actually, you can call her over to join us. Due to Mike's honesty, the girls who were related to him all knew about his existence. I'm afraid that won't work. After hearing the queen bee's proposal, Mike thought about it and shook his head slightly. Maybe because they were not members of the devil body group, or because they were not in the same grade as the other girls. There was always some intangible gap between Lina and Regina. Of course, there was no obvious contradiction between the two sides. That's a pity. Regina said deliberately, we were going to call you tomorrow to have a music party together. Do you know how to play musical instruments? Mike asked in surprise. Not yet, but I'm learning. Regina continued to smile and said, by the way, I can give you a hint. Gretchen is learning the recorder. Isn't the recorder just playing the recorder? On the side, Gretchen, who was still a little shy, had a redder face when she heard Regina mention her. It is worth mentioning that Gretchen's skin has been getting better and better since she had close contact with Mike. I'm also interested in musical instruments. How about we study it together the day after tomorrow? Mike suggested. Then, in Regina's sports car, Mike spent a lot of time talking and finally got the other party to agree to his proposal before being sent home. On Saturday, Mike spent a good day with Lina at her farm, which made up for the girls' regret on Halloween. In the evening, when Mike came to Cooper's house for dinner with satisfaction, he saw little George with obvious slap marks on his face. What's wrong with him? Mike asked curiously. Hearing Mike's question, George and his wife looked like they wanted to say something but stopped laughing. Grandma Connie laughed out loud. I know, Missy raised her hand and said, at the holy water baptism ceremony in the church this morning, little George wanted to kiss the sister opposite, and then he was beaten by the other party. Chapter 166 Hormones at Work. She took the initiative to hold me up, and she even closed her eyes. Little George tried his best to defend himself. This church's holy water baptism was a way for the church to give back to the believers because of the large amount of money raised on Halloween. Therefore, this baptism ceremony was very grand. It happened that Veronica and little George were assigned to the same group to enter the holy water pool. Perhaps because of the atmosphere, the girl gave little George a polite hug while baptizing. But little George, who was in the stage of hormonal exuberance, could not resist the girl's wet temptation. So under the witness of countless believers, little George bravely then, he received a big slap from the girl. Okay, little George. I understand you. I was young once. At the table, George, who had finished eating melon, comforted his eldest son. The slap that little George received in front of the believers today was enough to make him die. As an old father, George did not want to embarrass the other party because of this matter. After all, who doesn't have a time when they are young and impulsive? After receiving the comfort from his father, George felt much better. However, he still defended himself again. I didn't want to do that, but I really couldn't control myself at that time. It was hormones. Yes, it was all the fault of hormones. Yes, in order to wash away the wrong, George blamed all his behavior on hormones. You know what? It sounds quite reasonable. I understand seeing that his eldest son was not devastated by the blow. George smiled and shared his experience. In fact, I also did stupid things for a girl back then. I know that feeling. Oh, who is she? Hearing his father's gossip, George asked curiously, is she your first love? Her name is Catherine Dempsey, a very cute girl. George looked like he was reminiscing. But he didn't realize that, while he was talking to his eldest son, his wife Mary's eyes were getting more and more dangerous. George was very interested in his father's gossip, and was going to continue asking. On the side, Mary, who had been patient to the limit, said, that's enough little George. It's time to eat now. Seeing his mother's stern expression, little George, who was full of questions, had to swallow his words and obediently lowered his head to eat the steak in front of him. George also found that his wife was not right. She seemed to be jealous. So he quickly explained, I was only 15 years old at the time, and didn't know anything. However, facing her husband's explanation, Mary didn't listen at all. Then she had a cold face, and used a knife and fork to cut the steak on the plate fiercely. George was embarrassed by his wife's behavior. Moreover, he was a little bit wrong about the cause of this matter. Then, George shook his head helplessly, and could only lower his head to eat the steak silently. Just when the dinner was about to end in this silent atmosphere, Mary, who finished the steak first, suddenly looked up and asked, Mike, are you free tomorrow? Tomorrow is the day when Mike and Regina agreed to exchange musical instruments. But in case Mary had something more important to do, he still asked, is there anything I can help you with? It's like this. Mary said, I have a friend who is a child expert and specializes in brain development. Mary's friend was not really a friend. The man heard from somewhere that the prodigy Sheldon had a very high IQ. So, he wanted to study the situation of the Cooper siblings. And because Mary mentioned it by chance, Mike's IQ was also very high. Therefore, the man also became interested in Mike's brain. The other party promised to pay a subsidy of 10 million yuan per hour during the test. And the round-trip fare will also be reimbursed. After Mary introduced the situation, she asked, what do you think, Mike? Are you interested? Calculated based on 8 hours a day, plus the round-trip fare. If Mike agrees to take the test, he can earn at least 100 million yuan in extra money tomorrow. Don't underestimate 100 million yuan. It is equivalent to half a month's salary for Mary or George. Sorry, I have something else to do tomorrow. I'm afraid I can't take the test. Mike declined politely. He didn't want to be used as material for others to study. That's a pity. Mary shook her head disappointedly. She really felt sorry for Mike, who couldn't earn the extra 100 million yuan. On the other side, Grandma Connie saw the situation clearly. She smiled and said, there's nothing to regret. Mike is not short of money now. He will probably be busy taking care of his girlfriends tomorrow. Grandma Connie knew that Mike was investing in stocks and had made a small profit in the stock market recently. Of course, she also felt that it was not bad for young people like Mike to spend more time with the opposite sex. On this side, Mary also knew something about Mike's relationship. Moreover, Grandma Connie used the word they very vividly just now. Therefore, she didn't persuade Mike to do any brain test, a correct version in 1619 book bar, until the end of dinner, when Mary cleaned up the dishes and went to the kitchen. George couldn't help asking his father again, Dad, do you think I should give up Veronica? Talking about his eldest son's relationship, George, as a person who has experienced it, knew that the other party was at an age with strong hormones, and would definitely not give up his first relationship so easily. So, he said, your heart will guide you. Yes, George believed that his eldest son needed to hit the wall once, before he would give up, or mature. Yes, some people still remember their first love, Catherine. At this time, Mary, who came out to clean up the dishes for the second time, heard her husband's speech. With a dissatisfied expression on her face, she deliberately provoked her husband because she was still jealous. I said, "That was what I did when I was young. I have forgotten her a long time ago." George felt his wife's dissatisfaction and explained helplessly again. "Yes, you have forgotten, her name is Catherine." After Mary finished speaking in a sarcastic tone, she picked up the remaining dishes and went back to the kitchen angrily. "I really forgot her." George, who felt wronged, shouted at the kitchen. Then, when he turned around, he saw the scrutinizing eyes of Grandma Connie. "I really forgot." George helplessly defended himself again. I understand, Grandma Connie smiled and said, "It's normal for first love to be memorable. You should think about how to explain it to Mary." After that, Grandma Connie called Mike and left the Cooper family together. George was left there, facing the gossiping eyes of the children. He said in shame, "Go back to the room." It was rare to see the old man angry, and Sheldon and Missy were subdued and walked to the room obediently. Only George looked at his father with sympathy and said, "I understand you." Thinking of his current situation, which was all caused by his eldest son, George said sternly, "You also disappear quickly." Got it? George saluted funny and walked to his room. He has decided to use the weekend to write a love letter to Veronica. After school, he will formally confess to each other. Chapter 167 Party. On Sunday, the Coopers drove Sheldon and Missy to the Children's Research Institute in Texas. Mike went to Regina's house as agreed. As for Grandma Connie, she also had an important plan today. She wanted to teach Professor John, who lived a conservative life, how to drive a car. At Regina's house, Amy knew that her daughter and several girls in the Divil Body group wanted to learn musical instruments. This hot mother showed great interest. In order to support her daughter and several girls' hobbies, she bought a lot of musical instruments for her home during the weekend and even vacated a musical instrument room in the villa. When Mike came to the door, this hot mother was stunned. During this period of time, with many exchanges with the girls, Mike's charm value has become higher and higher. For a single young woman like Amy, the lethality can be called nuclear bomb level. In fact, I also have some research on musical instruments. If possible, I can teach you alone. When Amy knew the purpose of Mike's visit, she said meaningfully. Looking at her mother's coquettish appearance, Regina felt ashamed. She shouted in shame and anger, "Mom, I know." After her good deeds were interrupted, Amy pretended to sigh and said with a smile, "I'll leave this to you. Have fun then." She glanced at Mike and turned to walk outside the temporary music equipment room. But before Regina could breathe a sigh of relief, Amy stopped at the door again, flirted with Mike like a flirt, and said, "Mike, if you need anything, you can come to me at any time." This time, she put all the pressure on Mike. Next, in order to appease the jealous Regina, Mike relied on his super high wisdom and temporarily learned a variety of musical instruments to satisfy the girl. Then, Mike had time to share his summed up skills of playing and singing with other girls in the Divil figure group. Overall, Mike had a very exciting and fulfilling day. In the evening, with Amy's meaningful smile, Mike quickly left the villa. When he returned home, he happened to see Grandma Connie, who was dressed very formally, looking in the mirror in front of a full-length mirror. Seeing Mike coming back, Grandma Connie asked unconfidently, "Mike, help me see. How do you like this dress?" "Very good, Connie. You are very charming now." Mike smiled and praised. Although Grandma Connie is old, she is still charming among the elderly. "Thank you." Hearing the compliment, Grandma Connie was very happy. Then, she continued, "You go to Cooper's house for dinner today. I have activities with John later." "Understood. I wish you a good time tonight." Although Mike did not deliberately inquire about Grandma Connie's private life, but he still knew that at this stage, she and Professor John were fighting fiercely. Then, Mike, who did not disturb Grandma Connie's good things, simply washed up and went to Cooper's house alone. "Mike, you know, I took the test today and got a full score." At Cooper's house, Missy saw Mike coming and happily shared the good news with him. At this time, George and his wife at the table were also talking about their two children going to the Children's Research Institute for tests. It was not until today, when the institute's test was completed, that the couple realized that their little daughter had a very high emotional intelligence. On the other hand, after hearing Mrs. boasting, little Sheldon also said proudly, "I also got full marks on the intelligence test." In the eyes of little Sheldon, intelligence is obviously higher than emotional intelligence. Of course, this conclusion was not drawn, because he got a 0 on today's emotional intelligence test, and thus intentionally belittled emotional intelligence. Anyway, I got full marks. Missy, who finally surpassed little Sheldon in some aspects, naturally did not want the limelight to be taken by the other party. Seeing that the two children were about to debate, Mary quickly said, "Okay, you are all little geniuses, hurry up and eat." Although she said so, looking at Mary's expression, she still favored her younger son a little more. Missy, who was delicate in feelings, naturally discovered this. After a hum, she turned her head aside to express her dissatisfaction. Seeing that the little girl also had such a proud side, Mike smiled and shook his head, and whispered a few words of comfort to the other party, which made her happy again. At the same time, Grandma Connie also drove a car and took Professor John to the banquet venue. Today, Professor John invited Grandma Connie to attend a high-class party composed of many professors and elites from all walks of life. Grandma Connie, who had never attended such a high-end party, asked again unconfidently, after arriving at the door of the party venue, "John, are you sure it's okay for me to go in? You know, there are smart people inside." "It's okay, Connie, you are no worse than anyone else." In order to reassure the other party, Professor John continued, "You are more talented than me in driving a car." Yes, Professor John, who had learned to drive all day today, still couldn't learn how to drive them in the end. In Grandma Connie's opinion, his performance can be called clumsy. Read the correct version in the 16:9 book forum. After all, simple things like driving can be done by ordinary people with hands. Thinking that even smart John has things he is not good at, Grandma Connie suddenly gained some confidence in the party in front of her. However, after entering the party, looking at the upper class people who were chatting and laughing freely, Grandma Connie couldn't help but become reserved again. After Professor John introduced several waves of people to her, he also found that Grandma Connie's state was not right, so he didn't force it. Grandma Connie, who felt that she couldn't fit in with the crowd, went to the corner alone, holding a glass of wine to hide her embarrassment. However, Grandma Connie, who had a unique charm, couldn't hide her charm, even if she hid in the corner. A tall and well-mannered old man came to the corner and said, "Beautiful lady, if you don't mind, can you have a drink with me?" Grandma Connie, who had nothing to do and felt very bored, saw someone actively chatting her up and smiled and raised her glass and said, "Of course." After observing closely, Dr. Linkletter felt that Grandma Connie was very charming. So, after taking a sip of the wine glass, he continued, "I wonder what you are an expert in?" "Research." Grandma Connie realized that the other party had misunderstood, but in order not to embarrass herself, she thought for a moment and said cleverly, "I'm very knowledgeable about my little grandson. I know he's very interested in science. By the way, it's that kind of thing with a lot of balls connected together. It seems to be called protons or something." It was the first time that Dr. Linkletter met such an interesting person as Grandma Connie. He even thought that the other party's gestures were very cute. "You are talking about the proton model, right?" Dr. Linkletter said with a smile. "Those balls are really a headache." "Yeah, you also think science is a headache. I just don't know why Shelley likes those things so much." Grandma Connie seemed to have found a soulmate, and then she complained about science to the other party. After being subtly influenced by her little grandson over the years, Grandma Connie knew a lot of things worth complaining about in science. On the other side, Dr. Linkletter found Grandma Connie more and more interesting, so he also echoed her. The two of them chatted quite happily without realizing it. On this side, after Professor John greeted a few old friends, he turned around and saw that his house had been robbed. Chapter 168 Leaving. Professor John came to the corner angrily, protecting Grandma Connie behind him, and then said in a warning tone, "Linkletter, your behavior of poaching is very rude." Dr. Linkletter is no worse than Professor John in height, appearance, and knowledge, which makes John feel a strong sense of crisis. Of course, Professor John's immature behavior at this moment is also related to this being his first love. Strictly speaking, Professor John is still a young man in terms of feelings. Dr. Linklater was also stimulated by Professor John's excess of behavior, and then he said with a little sarcasm, "If I were you, I would never leave the female companion who came with me in the corner and go out by myself." Grandma Connie's discomfort before was obviously seen by Dr. Linklater. "This is none of your business," Professor John refuted strongly like an angry bull. Then, the two old men, who were almost 70 years old, stared at each other fiercely like fighting cocks, and refused to give in to each other. Wait, is there any misunderstanding here? Seeing the two men arguing, Grandma Connie stepped out to ease the atmosphere. In fact, through previous contacts, Grandma Connie had a good impression of the polite and humorous Dr. Linklater. No misunderstanding. Professor John thought of the scene he saw before, and was furious with Dr. Linklater. Jealousy is a man's nature. Then, Professor John turned around and whispered to Grandma Connie, "His name is Linklater, and he is my colleague. I know him too well, but he is still a man who has never been in a relationship." Professor John's meaning is very clear. As a man, Dr. Linklater is likely to be trying to attract Grandma Connie's attention, whether intentionally or unintentionally. When Professor John was whispering, his voice was just heard by Dr. Linklater next to him. Of course, it is also possible that Professor John was deliberately showing off to his colleagues. You know, he has been single for 60 or 70 years, but now he has found a girlfriend before his colleagues. Yes, men's vanity or desire to win is sometimes so strange. Over there, Dr. Linklater was really embarrassed by Professor John's exposure. Grandma Connie, who was very perceptive, knew that Professor John's exposure of others' shortcomings was very impolite. So, she apologized on his behalf. "Mr. Linklater, please forgive John's unreasonableness. I don't think he meant it." Linklater, who was originally thinking about how to save face from John, shook his head and turned away after hearing Grandma Connie's apology. Before leaving, he deliberately glared at Professor John, as if lamenting that he had found such a good woman. "Why do you want to apologize to him? What I said is the truth." Professor John, who was dominated by jealousy, did not realize his mistake. Grandma Connie glanced at Professor John, who was very immature, shook her head slightly, and left the corner with her wine glass, and then blended into the crowd of people at the party. Only Professor John, who was still confused, was left there. Later, until the end of the banquet, when Grandma Connie drove Professor John home, the other party still looked unhappy. "Are you still angry with Mr. Linklater?" Grandma Connie asked with a smile, looking at the other party's angry look. "No, I'm angry with myself," Professor John replied in a muffled voice. In the second half of this party, after Dr. Linklater approached Grandma Connie realized that the successful people present might not be that great. So Grandma Connie chose to actively integrate into the crowd, and soon made many new friends with her unique charm. She is very good at interpersonal communication. However, it was Grandma Connie's super communication ability that made Professor John feel a sense of urgency for no reason. On the one hand, he felt that he was a little unworthy of such a charming Grandma Connie. On the other hand, he cared too much about Grandma Connie and was afraid of losing her. With a variety of emotions intertwined, Professor John was in a state of worry and loss. "John, you have to have confidence in me and in yourself." Grandma Connie, who was driving the car, seemed to have the ability to read minds and instantly guessed Professor John's thoughts. Then, she said kindly, "Don't forget, you are a cute little potato." After Halloween, Grandma Connie and Professor John have officially confirmed their relationship. As for Little Potato, it is the nickname that Grandma Connie privately calls Professor John. Listening to Connie's words, Professor John also realized that his behavior today was a bit too sensitive. So, he promised seriously, "Connie, I promise that I will never do this again. I will learn to be mature." Time came to Monday afternoon after school, when Mike packed up his things and prepared to leave school. Mr. Andy from the drama club stopped him in the corridor. "Mr. Andy, I have thought about joining the drama club." Mike thought that the other party was here to invite him to join the drama club again, and he was about to say no. Who knew that Mr. Andy was impatient, and he spoke first. "Sorry Mike, I have quit my job at the school, so I'm afraid that I can't fulfill my promise to you before." Read the correct version in the 16 to 9 book forum. In order to get Mike to join the drama club, Mr. Andy had promised him that if he joined the drama club, he would pass on all his acting experience to him. "You quit?" Mike asked in surprise. Only then did Mike notice that Mr. Andy was carrying a lot of things in his hands. It seemed that he was really ready to leave. "Yes, I plan to go out and try my luck." Out of guilt, Mr. Andy told Mike all his plans. It turned out that it was the preparations for Halloween in the church that made Mr. Andy discover his talent as a director. After more than a week of serious consideration, he realized that his passion for directing even exceeded that of acting. So Mr. Andy, who confirmed his true intention, decided to go out and try his luck. And he also planned to direct a memorable and classic film. "I wish you success, Mr. Andy." After knowing his ambition, Mike sent his blessings in time. In Mike's opinion, Mr. Andy, who is only in his 30s this year, has a superb talent in art. If he chooses to leave school and work hard outside, he will have a great chance to realize his dream. "Thank you." After receiving the blessing, Mr. Andy smiled. Then, he continued, "In order to make up for the regret of not being able to be your instructor, I have sorted out all the teaching plans on acting. Now they are yours. You can read more when you have time." After that, he handed the pile of books in his hand to Mike. In his opinion, Mike has a high talent in acting. Coupled with that handsome face, it would be a waste if he didn't act. Mike didn't say anything to spoil the mood at this time, and took the books in his hands. It can be seen that Mr. Andy prepared these materials very carefully. In addition to the books on acting, there are also books on music theory. Of course, there are also some annotated notebooks written by him. "Okay, keep up the good work. We may have the opportunity to cooperate in the future." Mr. Andy smiled and waved to Mike, leaving only a chic back. Chapter 169 Little George's Love Letter. At this time, near the entrance of the teaching building, George, holding a piece of pink letter paper in his hand, was looking at the student locker with a nervous look. That was the place he chose for himself to confess to Veronica. Not long after, Veronica, wearing a black jacket and carrying a school bag, appeared in front of the locker. Take a deep breath. George calmed down his nervous mood and made full preparations. When he was about to attack, he saw Sheldon passing by the stairway. Then, Veronica, who also saw Sheldon, came forward to greet him with a look of surprise. The two didn't know what they said, and saw that after the conversation, Veronica leaned over and hugged Sheldon. Seeing the goddess in his heart hugging his younger brother, George, who watched the whole process, was very jealous. When Sheldon said goodbye to Veronica and came to the door, George quickly pulled him aside. "How did you know Veronica?" George asked sourly. Dominated by the hormones of youth, he obviously regarded little Sheldon as a potential rival in love. "I'm helping her with math now, and with my help, she got a C in the math test this time." Little Sheldon, who didn't understand the atmosphere, said with a little pride. In his opinion, it is a very good achievement to help poor students get passing grades. "Let me tell you in secret, Veronica is very stupid. I spent a lot of effort to get her passing math grades." Little Sheldon emphasized his role again. "Really? Had her?" Little George smiled perfunctorily. He was not interested in little Sheldon's boasting. He only knew, now that Veronica gave little Sheldon a hug just now, because she thanked him for his help in learning. This discovery made little George feel much better. Then, he asked curiously, "By the way, when did you start teaching her math?" Little Sheldon thought for a while and answered truthfully, "About half a month." "So long? How come I didn't know?" Little George realized that Veronica had known little Sheldon earlier than he did. This made him feel that he didn't know enough about the girl. "Didn't I tell you?" Little Sheldon said indifferently. "Veronica used to be tutored by her sister, but later her sister was gone, so she found me." Hearing that Veronica had a sister, little George, who wanted to know more about her, asked, "Since she is gone, where did her sister go?" "I heard that she was sent to prison for economic fraud." Little Sheldon said. "From this, we can know that Veronica's sister is definitely a smart person." After finding out that Veronica's sister was a criminal, little George was a little embarrassed. In his opinion, the goddess in his heart should be the embodiment of perfection. So, George, who had lost interest in continuing to inquire, said, "Okay, Sheldon, you should go home." Obviously, George wanted to get rid of the other party and then go on with his confession plan. Little Sheldon didn't care much about George's change of attitude. After looking at him, he left the teaching building with his textbooks. George, who was left at the door of the teaching building, saw that Veronica had closed her locker, so he hurried to meet her. That, Veronica, what a coincidence. George used an old-fashioned way to pick up a conversation. I don't know why, every time he faces Veronica, he will unconsciously get nervous. It's a coincidence. Veronica glanced at George and said coldly, "Don't you have anything to say about the church baptism?" Obviously, the girl was still angry about George's unreasonable behavior in the church that day. "I apologize for my behavior that day. In fact, I don't know what happened to me at that time. It may be because of hormones." George, who had a short circuit in his brain, once again took out the excuse of hormones. Although, he also thought this excuse was bad. "Okay, I forgive you." Looking at the helpless boy in front of her, Veronica generously forgave him. "I know my reasons, huh?" Little George, who was still thinking about how to explain, confirmed with surprise after hearing the girl's words. "You really forgive me?" "Yes." Veronica smiled and nodded. In fact, Veronica, who had had several ex-boyfriends, didn't care so much about George's behavior that day. "That's great." Little George, who didn't know the truth, heard that the girl really forgave him and saw the charming smile on her face, and he just felt like he saw an angel. On the other side, Veronica saw that George, who had been forgiven by her, was still blocking the road with a silly smile on his face. Then, she frowned slightly and asked, "Do you have anything else to say?" At this time, the girl's subtext should be, "If you have nothing to say, get out of the way quickly. I actually have something important to tell you," Little George said, raising the letterhead in his hand. At this moment, this letterhead carrying George's love seemed as heavy as a mountain. "What is this?" Veronica looked at the letterhead that was trembling and was about to reach out to take it. "Isn't this George? What do you want with my girlfriend?" Along with the question, a tall and sunny boy took the letterhead before Veronica. The man was Dustin, a 12th grader, and now Veronica's new boyfriend. "By the way, George, let me introduce you. This is my boyfriend Dustin. We met at the church study group yesterday," Veronica introduced. "Boyfriend, friend." Hearing the girl's introduction, George felt like the sky was falling. As for what the other party said later, he was no longer in the mood to listen. A perfect version in 16:9 book bar. At this moment, the word boyfriend kept echoing in his mind. "By the way, you haven't told me yet, what do you want to do with my girlfriend?" Dustin's words brought George back to reality. Pink letterhead, this can't be a love letter. As a bystander, Dustin obviously saw some of George's little thoughts. Then, he deliberately hugged Veronica, unfolded the letterhead with one hand, and said with a smile, "Let me see, what did you write?" "My beloved Veronica," Dustin read in a weird tone. "Every minute away from you feels like eternity, but it feels longer than eternity." When George saw that Veronica did not refuse Dustin's hug, he was disappointed and wanted to leave. After hearing Dustin read the love letter he wrote to Veronica in a funny way, he was too ashamed to stay here any longer. This was tantamount to public execution for him. With the booing of the students in the corridor, George, with a blank mind, squeezed through the crowd and turned to run towards the teaching building. Over there, Dustin felt relieved when he saw George running away like a dog. Then, amid the booing of the students around him, he continued to read with a smug look on his face. "Oh, I can't eat or sleep. It's like there's a hole in my heart that only you can fill." Enough. Mike stepped forward and snatched the letterhead from Dustin's hand. Mike, who happened to go downstairs, saw the whole process of this farce. In his opinion, Dustin's show-off behavior was a bit too much. What's more, Mike has a good relationship with George, so he naturally looks down on Dustin's mean face. Dustin, who was just feeling proud, must be very unhappy when his pretentious behavior was interrupted. But when he saw that the person coming was Mike, The angry expression on his face instantly disappeared by more than half. "Are you Mike from the 11th grade? Mike is a famous figure in the school, so Dustin naturally knows him. But he couldn't understand why the other party seemed to be full of hostility towards him. George is my friend. Please be respectful to him." Mike quickly solved Dustin's doubts. "You." Dustin couldn't bear the warning from the junior students in front of so many students. But when he saw Mike's sharp eyes, he suddenly felt a strong palpitation. It felt like being stared at by a beast. Then, Dustin, who felt the danger, swallowed all the harsh words that came to his mouth. As his physique continued to improve, Mike had a sense of oppression without anger. If he wanted, he could use his momentum to scare an ordinary person to the point of weakness. This situation is very mysterious, but people who have faced wild beasts should understand this feeling. At this moment, Dustin, who is half a head shorter than Mike, is probably in this situation. Mike, after looking at Dustin's legs shaking uncontrollably, turned around and left the school. In the back corridor, after Mike left, Dustin's legs softened, and he fell to the ground. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 170 Technology Lecture. Not long after leaving school, Mike saw little George on the roadside. He was squatting under a tree with his back to the road, his shoulders shrugged, as if he was crying. Yes, little George had just ended his unrequited love, and he saw his first love goddess fall into the arms of another man. With such a series of blows, it seemed reasonable for him to find a place to cry. "Little George, you are." Mike wanted to comfort him. But when he got closer to the tree, he saw little George squatting on the ground with an interested look on his face, observing a row of ants moving on the ground. Moreover, he was holding a small stick in his hand, messing with the ants. Although the ants moving was very attractive to the boy, it must be said that little George was really generous. "Mike, why are you here?" little George said, hiding the small stick in his hand. He was still a little embarrassed to be seen by Mike in such a childish way. "Oh, I came to give you something," Mike said as if nothing had happened, then took out the letterhead and handed it to the other party. Seeing the letterhead, George thought of Veronica again. He said with a depressed look, "Did you see it all?" Well, it seems that George's heart is not that big. In his current state, he looks like he needs someone to comfort him. "George, I understand your feelings." Mike acted as a counselor and continued, "There are many good girls in the world. There is always one suitable for you, waiting for you in front." "Perfect," Mike said, what he had been holding back for a long time and had prepared long ago. He felt that he could now be called a qualified intimate big brother. You. George wanted to say that Mike, who had several beautiful girlfriends, did not understand his feelings of losing his first love at all. However, looking at Mike's kind face, George finally did not say it. "I know you are very upset now, but time is the best medicine. It will make you forget all the sadness." Mike continued to play the role of a life mentor. Then, he patted George's shoulder to comfort him. Then he called him and walked home together. Sure enough, Mike's advice was not completely useless. In the following week, George slowly walked out of the shadow of a broken heart. It was Friday afternoon. After Professor John's university course, he walked up to Mike and Sheldon and said, "I'm now participating in a university research group. If you are interested, you can continue to come to the research group as an auditor on weekends." Professor John has discovered through this period of contact that Mike and Sheldon are both very smart. Normal university courses are no longer of much use to them. On the contrary, participating in a professional research group may be beneficial to their future development. Of course, Professor John would not be so kind for no reason. He invited Mike and the other two to please Grandma Connie. Yes, he is now learning how to become mature. Taking care of the other's family is a sign of maturity in his opinion. "What is the topic of your research group?" Little Sheldon, who loves science, is very interested in Professor John's proposal. "It's about physics. As for the specific direction, I still need to discuss it with Dr. Linklater," Professor John replied. When mentioning Dr. Linklater, his tone was obviously not very good. However, who can blame the fact that the only people with super high level in physics in the University of Texas are Dr. Linklater and Professor John? Even if Professor John is very reluctant, in order for the project to proceed smoothly, he has to continue to be a colleague with Dr. Linklater. Has the research topic not been decided yet? Little Sheldon hesitated for a while, and then said, I'm afraid I won't be free this weekend. I need to attend a science and technology lecture. It doesn't matter. Professor John smiled and said, determining the research topic is a very long process. Even if you agree to come to audit, it will be a few weeks later. Obviously, Professor John's invitation was just to give Mike and the others a heads up. That's great. Little Sheldon was relieved to see that the research project did not conflict with his science and technology lecture. Then, he said, please inform me in time after your research topic is determined. I will. Professor John nodded. Then he looked at Mike and said, by the way, are you still in touch with Peggy? If possible, I want her to join my research project as an auditor. Obviously, Professor John was also deeply impressed by the genius girl. Or rather, he admired her very much. Peggy hasn't contacted me during this period, but I will convey your words to her. Mike responded. Peggy has not come to the University of Texas since she attended to lectures by Professor John. She has not even contacted Mike, who has a good relationship with her. Okay, you guys walk around. I have something else to do. Professor John saw Grandma Connie waiting at the door and did not waste any more time. While Professor John and Grandma Connie were hanging out, Mike and little Sheldon were also strolling around the University of Texas. A perfect version of the book bar in 1619. Mike, are you free tomorrow? I want you to go to the science and technology lecture with me. Little Sheldon invited. In his opinion, Mike spent all his weekends playing with girls, which was a waste of time and life. Where did you know about the technology lecture? Mike asked curiously. Mike knew that he would meet Peggy again at this technology lecture, so he had paid special attention to the news in this regard before. But the actual situation was that he had no idea about the lecture. But Sheldon knew the time of the lecture accurately, which puzzled Mike. Newspaper. I saw the news about the lecture in the morning newspaper. Sheldon said. So that's it. Mike solved the doubts in his heart. He knew that the Cooper family had always had the habit of subscribing to newspapers, and of course Connor's grandma's family also had it. But after having a computer, Mike rarely paid attention to newspapers. How about it? Do you want to go with me? I heard that the initiator of this lecture is an expert who has published his own book. Sheldon invited again. Of course, I'm actually very interested in the technology lecture. When you leave tomorrow, remember to call me. Mike smiled and said. The actual situation is that Mike hasn't seen Peggy for a long time, and he doesn't know how the other party is doing. Mike is still very concerned about people who can provide him with the main attribute of intelligence. Are you sure you want to go? Now it was Sheldon's turn to be surprised. He had never expected that Mike would agree so readily this time. You know, on normal weekends, Mike would spend most of his time with Katie and the other girls. Even though Sheldon's EQ was not high, he realized that Katie and the others were very attractive to Mike. I'm sure. Mike smiled and nodded. Okay, Sheldon didn't ask any more questions and continued. At dinner time today, we'll go talk to George and ask him to take us to the technology lecture tomorrow. Chapter 171 Bargaining Skills. Grandma Connie's house was not big to begin with, and the new furniture Ella gave her made it even more crowded. So she planned to take advantage of this weekend to sell the unused items at home. This would free up space at home and earn some extra money, killing two birds with one stone. Mike got up early, and before going to the technology lecture, he also helped move the large furniture that was not used at home to the door. Similarly, little George and Missy, who had nothing to do on Saturday, were also called over to help. Soon, after the efforts of the four people, the old furniture and various sundries that were not used at home were moved to the door, forming a temporary flea market. Come on. Have some juice, and take a break after the old items were laid out. Grandma Connie served drinks to the three. Next, let's discuss some business. When the few people had almost rested, Grandma Connie called George and Missy to her and said, Mike will go to a lecture in a while. So, I hope you two can stay and help. Although the flea market at the door is not large, there are many things like golf clubs, pipes and various small souvenirs. If only one person sells them, it will be too busy. Obviously, Grandma Connie wants to recruit Missy and the other two as temporary salesmen. Seeing that the two children did not speak, it was considered as tacit consent. Grandma Connie asked, "Do you know how to sell things and bargain?" Missy and the other two, who had never had any work experience, shook their heads at the same time. Okay, Grandma Connie saw this and said, "Let me teach you some experience." So, Grandma Connie told the two people the skills of bargaining. For example, when someone wants to buy a certain item, he should first offer a high price to the other party, and then negotiate a middle price after the other party bargains. After the price goes up and down, both parties can be satisfied. How do you understand? Asked Grandma Connie, after sharing her sales experience. However, this is the first time for Missy and the other two to work, and they are obviously going to disappoint her. After listening to Grandma Connie's explanation, the two still looked confused. Okay, Grandma Connie shook her head and said, "It doesn't matter if you don't understand. I will watch you when you actually operate it later. Now, you can get familiar with the goods first." Just as the two children were about to work, George suddenly realized that something was wrong. He stopped and said shrewdly, "Wait, you haven't told me how much we are paid." Obviously, George didn't know nothing. He at least knew that if you work, you should be paid accordingly. After George's reminder, Missy also reacted. She said cleverly, "We want 5 yuan. Yes, 5 yuan per person." George echoed, 1 yuan. Grandma Connie smiled and bargained. "This is too low," George complained. "This is the bargaining I told you about," Grandma Connie said with a little pride. At this moment, George seemed to understand what Grandma Connie meant. He suddenly said, 4 yuan, 2 yuan, no more." Grandma Connie looked like she had suffered a big loss. "How about 3 yuan? This is the middle price we can all accept." George learned very quickly, as if he had already learned the essence of bargaining. "Okay, I'm convinced by you. 3 yuan." Grandma Connie looked heartbroken. Then, she asked, "So, do you want to have lunch at my place?" Of course, George said casually, "I want to eat beef pizza." "Okay, let me do the math," Grandma Connie said, picking up a pen and paper from the side, and after writing and calculating, she continued, "Beef pizza is 10 yuan, after deducting your wages. Now, each of you still owes me 2 yuan. At this moment, George and Missy, who were not very sensitive to numbers, were shocked. How could this be? George was surprised. "That's the truth. If you don't believe me, look for yourself." Grandma Connie handed the calculation paper to George and said heartbreakingly, "I haven't included the bottle of drink you had before." Then, George and his partner looked at the paper carefully and found that according to Grandma Connie's calculation, they still owed the other party 2 yuan. Looking at the two children's expressions of doubt about life, Grandma Connie smiled secretly and said generously, "How about this? If you two are willing to help me for free, I won't ask you for money. How about that? Hurry up and agree to her." Math idiot Missy heard that she didn't owe any money and hurriedly urged George, who was negotiating for her side. "Okay, we agree." George, who was not very smart, agreed to Grandma Connie's proposal. In fact, he had been confused by the other party and didn't realize that he was working for the other party and still owed the other party money. On the side, Mike, who had watched the whole show, finally couldn't help laughing. Read the correct version in 1619 book bar. In fact, the capitalists would cry when they see Connie's exploitation. But the deceived party still looks like they have made a profit. This situation is really hard to hold. Mike's smile finally made Missy and George realize that something was wrong again. Just when Missy and the other wanted to seek help from Mike, a smart man, Connie, who felt guilty, said to them first, "This is our battlefield. We can't ask for help from outside the field." At the same time, George's father drove the car with Sheldon on the opposite side and came to Mike. "Mike, we should leave." Sheldon rolled down the window and shouted. It can be seen that he attaches great importance to today's science and technology lecture, and his appearance and clothes are carefully prepared. "Yes, Mike, hurry up. Don't be late for the lecture." While speaking, Connie kept winking at Mike. Mike was naturally not interested in exposing Connor's conspiracy. He looked at Missy and the other two again and got in the car with a smile. After Mike left in the car, Grandma Connie looked at George and the others and said again in a serious tone, either you work for me for free or you two owe me $2 each. Choose now. Although Mike's implicit reminder made George and the others realize that something was wrong, but they couldn't figure out what was wrong. So, after they looked at each other, George said, we choose to work for free. Very good, then take action. Grandma Connie clapped her hands and urged. At this time, the sky was already bright, and there were many pedestrians on the street, attracted by the flea market in front of Grandma Connie's house. On the other side, on the car to the Texas Natural History Museum, Sheldon handed Mike a thin magazine and said, this is a brochure of this lecture, which records a lot of knowledge about carbon dating. This lecture in the Texas Natural History Museum mainly explains how to use carbon to determine the age of an item. Mike took the brochure, nodded, and read it carefully. For professional lectures like this, people who attend will usually do some homework in advance. This is also the most basic respect for the speaker. Chapter 172. Goodbye Peggy. Dad, how many years do you think the Earth has existed? Little Sheldon, who knew some carbon dating methods, chatted with George, who was driving. It should be a long time, probably billions of years. George thought for a while and replied, very good, it seems that we have the same understanding. Little Sheldon popularized science. In fact, the Earth has existed for more than 4 billion years. So long? Then it is really an antique. George said that he had learned new knowledge. I also asked my mother this question, but she firmly believed that the Earth has only existed for more than 6,000 years and was created by God. Little Sheldon shook his head slightly, as if lamenting his mother's ignorance. Then, he continued to ask, Dad, do you and your mother usually talk about this? And how do you deal with it when you have a disagreement? You know, the most difficult thing in the world is probably to convince someone who has a different opinion from you. No, Mary and I will not talk about this. And if we have a disagreement, I will choose to deal with it coldly and wait for time to smooth it out. George said freely. That's terrible. Little Sheldon couldn't imagine how big of a disaster it would be for two people with different ideas to form a family. Then, he looked at his father with sympathy and said, you have made me afraid of marriage. I think I will never marry someone with different ideas. Who knows? Some things are not up to you to decide. George said with the tone of an experienced person. So, never say forever strictly speaking. You just said forever twice in a row. Little Sheldon's focus is always different from that of ordinary people. George, who was originally planning to impart some life experience to his youngest son, was choked by the other party's nitpicking behavior. Then he sighed helplessly and lost interest in chatting. Under normal circumstances today, George should be lying on the sofa at home, drinking beer and watching football games. Because it is the end of the year, there are only more than 2 months away from next year's Super Bowl. As the most enthusiastic event in the United States, the Super Bowl has now begun to warm up on TV. Here, Sheldon. I'm done. When the car arrived at the Natural History Museum, Mike finished reading the magazine on carbon dating in his hand. Because it is a brochure, this magazine is not very thick. Similarly, there is not much professional knowledge in this magazine. But for little Sheldon, this professional magazine is still very precious. After he carefully put away the magazine, he followed George and Mike into the Natural History Museum. This Natural History Museum standing in Texas covers a large area and has a long history. In the middle of the exhibition hall, you can see simulated specimens of prehistoric animals such as mammoths and saber-toothed tigers. Wow, this big guy is really big. If it is used to eat meat, I'm afraid it won't be eaten in a year. George saw the huge dinosaur skeleton in the middle of the exhibition hall and couldn't help saying, this is a precious prehistoric animal specimen, not for people to eat meat. Little Sheldon rolled his eyes. He felt that his father's current behavior was very shameful. When he saw the tourists who came to the museum and cast their eyes on him, little Sheldon's feeling became stronger. Okay, I won't say anything. Seeing his youngest son's disgusted expression, George shrugged. Then, he asked, where is the lecture venue? It seems that he also wants to send his youngest son to the destination as soon as possible and then spend a happy weekend himself. After all, it was a bit uncomfortable for George to stay with the constantly nitpicking little Sheldon. Next, the three of them found the museum's lecture hall according to the instructions in the brochure. There were not many people in the spacious lecture hall yet, so little Sheldon easily occupied the advantageous listening position in the middle of the front row again. Mike, on his side, looked around when he entered the door. After not finding Peggy, he casually sat next to little Sheldon. "You stay here first. I'll go outside. I'll pick you up after the lecture." George was not interested in science and technology lectures. On the weekend, he just wanted to rest comfortably. "Mike, help me keep an eye on Shelly, and don't let him make a fool of himself." Before George left, he was still a little worried about his youngest son. "Little Sheldon has a unique talent for making trouble." "No problem." Mike nodded and accepted the commission. "Shelly, I'm at the door. If you have any questions, you can come to me." George once again worriedly told his youngest son. "Some people said they were leaving. Why are they still not moving?" Little Sheldon seemed to be annoyed by his father's nagging, and he also didn't like the other party's behavior of treating him like a child. Choked by his youngest son's words again, and stared at by the other party's disgusted eyes, George shook his head speechlessly and left the lecture hall quickly. In the lecture hall, as the time of the speech approached, listeners came in one after another. Most of these people who came in were middle-aged people in their 30s and 40s. But this is also easy to understand. Young people may not be so interested in antiquarianism and natural sciences. A perfect version in 16 to 9 book bar. Are you waiting for someone? Little Sheldon, who was flipping through the brochure again, found that Mike was absent-minded and looked at the door from time to time. "Yes, if nothing goes wrong, you will see her in a while." Mike smiled and said, "You know, every time little Sheldon and Peggy meet, there is a high probability that the main attribute of intelligence will burst out. This is a good thing for Mike. How come I didn't know that you have a friend who likes natural science?" Little Sheldon asked in surprise when he saw Mike's confident look. "You will know in a while. You are also acquainted with her," Mike said with some evil taste. "Hearing you say that, we all know the people who came." Little Sheldon thought about it, and his face gradually became wrong. He had a bad premonition. That person, it won't be Peggy. Just when little Sheldon was about to guess the correct answer, Peggy, who came in, was surprised to see Mike in the first row. "Mike, why are you here?" Peggy walked to the first row with a cheerful step. "What a coincidence," she said in surprise. Through previous contacts, Peggy has already regarded Mike as a good friend. The little girl who thought it was a coincidence was naturally very happy now. "It's a coincidence." Mike smiled and greeted the little girl. Today, Peggy was wearing a pink denim overall skirt, which looked handsome and cute. After she walked around little Sheldon, she sat on the other side of Mike. It was not until they sat down that Peggy seemed to see little Sheldon sitting across from her. "Sheldon, you are here too?" "Yes, I'm here to listen to the lecture on carbon dating." Little Sheldon straightened his back and answered in a serious tone. Chapter 173 Technology Lecture. In fact, from the moment Peggy appeared, little Sheldon was in high spirits. Maybe it was the unpleasant experience before, or the fact that the two were of the same age and had very high IQs, which made little Sheldon feel a strong sense of crisis. "Your little bow tie is very energetic today," Peggy complimented casually, as if she didn't feel the hostility of the other party. It can be said that in terms of emotional intelligence, she is no worse than Missy. It can also be said that Peggy is an upgraded version after the combination of little Sheldon and Missy, and then optimized. So, this is why little Sheldon has been suppressed by Peggy. "Thank you," little Sheldon answered formally. He was sitting upright, still waiting for the other party's provocation again. On the other hand, after greeting little Sheldon, Peggy turned her attention to Mike next to him. "Mike, what have you been doing recently? By the way, how did you spend Halloween? Was it interesting?" Peggy seemed to have opened her mouth. "I've been learning some musical instruments and music theory recently," Mike chatted casually. "As for Halloween, I went to the church to help." After hearing that Mike dressed up as an angel on Halloween and comforted a repentant girl, Peggy was very envious. Your Halloween was very meaningful. After Peggy finished speaking, she complained, I actually dressed up as Mary Curie that day and wanted to go out to ask for candy. As a result, my mother stopped me at home. She was afraid that it would be dangerous for me to go out at night. Although Ms. Linda's original intention was for the good of her daughter, however, her practice of depriving her daughter of the right to play was not very reasonable. From the girl's resentful expression now, it can be seen. That's a pity, but you still have a chance next year, Mike said comfortingly. Next year. Maybe Peggy thought about the situation at home and was not optimistic about her future. This may be the distress brought by super high IQ and EQ. Smart people often see farther than others, not to mention super geniuses like Peggy. Little Sheldon, who was listening with his ears perked up, was waiting for Peggy's challenge, but he ended up hearing the little girl's secret. Thinking of his pleasant experience of being recognized on Halloween, little Sheldon couldn't help but smile triumphantly. Then, without being disturbed, he lowered his head again to look through the promotional magazine in his hand. Intelligence main attribute +1. Little Sheldon, whose mood fluctuated greatly, successfully contributed a main attribute light ball to Mike. This, little Sheldon has learned to produce wool by himself. After Mike quietly took the light ball in his hand, he looked at the little Sheldon who was quietly reading the magazine next to him in surprise. Although he didn't know why the other party suddenly contributed a light ball, Mike was sure of one thing. Following the pace of the two little geniuses, this decision was indeed right. Mike, do you have anything else interesting to tell me? Peggy saw that Mike was distracted and immediately pulled his attention back. Interesting things? Little George's confession should be one. However, Mike obviously would not talk about such things. So he thought about it for a while and shared the 7 deadly sins short play created by Mr. Andy. In his opinion, Mr. Andy is a very interesting person. From what you said, Mr. Andy is a very talented person in art. After listening to Mike's story, Peggy gave her own evaluation. Mr. Andy is indeed very talented. Moreover, he is also a very courageous person. Mike said, he has gone out to make a living now and is determined to direct a classic film. It's great to be able to do what I want to do. Peggy, who was strictly controlled by her mother, yearned for a free life. By the way, Peggy, Professor John has a physics research project recently. I want to ask if you are interested in being an auditor. Mike talked about Professor John's instructions. University research project? Peggy showed an interested look. But soon, she said disappointedly, please thank Professor John for his kindness for me. I'm afraid I don't have time to go to the University of Texas recently. Thinking of the bad situation at home, the little girl was a little confused. Are there any difficulties? Tell me, Mike said guidingly. He had some understanding of the girl's family situation. If possible, he would choose to help her. Looking at Mike's sincere eyes, Peggy was silent for a long time. After thinking it over, she said, Unfortunately, just when the girl was about to tell her troubles, a female lecturer in her 40s walked into the lecture hall with documents under her arm. With so many people here, it seems that natural sciences are quite popular, the female lecturer said humorously, while striding to the front. When she saw Peggy and the other person sitting on both sides of Mike in the first row, she asked in surprise, young man, did you bring them here? In fact, we have a special reception room for children here. Obviously, the female lecturer of natural sciences misunderstood. She thought that Peggy and the other person were children taken care of by Mike. No, ma'am. I'm here to listen to the lecture on carbon dating. Little Sheldon frowned slightly. He was very dissatisfied to be treated as a child by the other party. Me too, Peggy spoke up immediately. She didn't want to be younger than Mike for no reason. In fact, they are both high school students. Mike also explained. Oh, sorry. It seems that I misunderstood. After seeing the reactions of the 3 people, the female lecturer gently admitted her mistake. Then, she smiled and said, it seems that there are not only young and handsome boys in my class, but also 2 little prodigies. Can I ask, how much do you know about carbon dating? As mentioned earlier, for a professional lecture like this, the audience will have some knowledge of this aspect, which can be regarded as a kind of respect for the lecturer. I read your brochure. Little Sheldon raised the magazine in his hand. A correct version is available in 1619 book bar. Very good. Although the female lecturer still had a smile on her face, she was sure in her heart that little Sheldon didn't know much about carbon dating. Sure enough, he is still a child. Thinking so in her heart, the female lecturer turned to Peggy and asked, "What about you, little girl? What do you know? I have read your accelerated autopsy paper, and there are some points in it that I find very interesting," Peggy said confidently. Interesting. The female lecturer was aroused by Peggy's answer, and she continued to ask, "Before the lecture begins, can you tell us what carbon dating is?" Of course, Peggy answered fluently. The half-life of carbon-14 is 5,430 years, which can be used as a geological timescale. Very good answer. The smile on the female lecturer's face became much more sincere. Then, she looked at Mike and Sheldon next to her and asked, "Do you have anything to add?" No, Mike shook his head. In fact, he only got a very limited understanding of professional carbon dating knowledge from the brochure. The female lecturer smiled, with an expression of as expected. Then, she looked at Sheldon and asked again, "What about you, little friend? Do you have anything to add?" Little Sheldon was surprised by Peggy's erudition. In order not to lose to the other party, he thought about it for a while and said tentatively, "Maybe carbon dating can be used to measure how old my grandma is." Obviously, the answer that Sheldon came up with on the spur of the moment has nothing to do with today's topic. His outrageous answer also caused the audience to burst into laughter. You know, the people who come here are basically half experts. Okay, the female teacher also laughed out loud. She knew that she shouldn't have too many expectations for children. Then, she controlled the classroom discipline and said, "Next, let me tell you about the knowledge of carbon dating." After the female lecturer went to the podium, Mike looked at the expressionless little Sheldon and asked, "Sheldon, are you okay?" Normal people would probably be depressed after being laughed at by a group of people, even if these laughs were well intentioned. "I have discovered another advantage of mine," little Sheldon whispered. "In addition to my high IQ, I'm also very talented in humor." Well, Mike knew that he shouldn't worry about little Sheldon's psychological problems. The other party's brain circuit is obviously different from that of ordinary people. "As long as you are happy," Mike laughed awkwardly and said. No matter whether little Sheldon really thinks he is very humorous now, or because he is stubborn and doesn't want to admit that he is not as good as Peggy, but at least, he lives a very self-centered life. For a young genius like Sheldon, living a self-centered life is a good thing. It can keep him from being disturbed by the outside world and protect himself well. Chapter 174 Troubles. On the other hand, Peggy, who has high IQ and EQ, can't do this. Super high EQ makes this little girl's thinking very mature, possessing the thinking of adults, but not the ability of adults to solve problems. This may be the source of her distress. In the fast food restaurant outside the museum, George's father, who temporarily got rid of the trouble of little Sheldon, ordered a butter fried chicken leg for himself. And on the TV in the fast food restaurant, it happened to be playing the wonderful replay of last year's Super Bowl. Although he had to drive to send little Sheldon and Mike back in a while, George didn't enjoy his favorite beer. However, being able to eat chicken legs covered with butter and watch the football game made him feel very comfortable. George at this time, a surprised voice sounded from behind George. Peggy's mother, Miss Linda, looked much more haggard than a few weeks ago. George, who was happily enjoying his alone time, looked at the woman who suddenly appeared in front of him and said in surprise, "You are that?" Obviously, the last failed family gathering did not make George remember Miss Linda's name. "I'm Peggy's mother." Linda smiled and reminded, and then sat down opposite George naturally. "I remember you, Miss Linda." George, who was interrupted on his weekend relaxation time, responded, "By the way, your husband Barry." Miss Linda smiled and reminded again. "Yes, where is Mr. Barry?" "He is not with you?" George asked perfunctorily. His eyes had already turned to the game on TV. At this moment, the football game on TV was playing at a wonderful part. Although he had watched it once last year, watching the replay still made George feel very interesting. "Are you talking about Barry?" Miss Linda, who was still smiling on her face the moment before, suddenly sank when she talked about her husband, and said, "Who cares? After that, she regained her smile on her face, as if it was all an illusion. Although George's attention was mostly on the football game, he still saw Linda's previous change of face. "Are you okay?" George, who was gentle in character, could hardly ignore Linda's change just now. "I'm fine, thank you for your concern." Ms. Linda maintained a decent smile and said, "Sorry to disturb your weekend. You don't have to worry about me, okay?" George obviously saw that the other party was hiding something under her smile. However, he just wanted to spend his weekend simply and didn't want to interfere in other people's family affairs. Generally, things like marital conflicts are very troublesome if you think about them. George, who didn't intend to meddle in other people's affairs, watched TV while picking up another chicken leg. After dipping it in the sauce dish with butter, he stuffed it into his mouth comfortably. But out of the corner of his eye, he saw Ms. Linda opposite, who had been watching his every move. The look of wanting to say something, but not being able to make up for it made people feel very uncomfortable. So George raised the chicken leg in his hand, diverted his attention and asked, "Do you want one?" "No, I need to keep in shape." Ms. Linda also realized that her behavior of staring at people was very rude. Then, she apologized and said, "You continue, don't worry about me." Then, she looked away and picked up the menu on the table. It looked like she was going to start ordering. However, Ms. Linda, who had been looking at the menu for a long time, suddenly became depressed and said in a crying voice, "Apple pie. They actually have apple pie. We also came here with Peggy last year, and then we went to Vegas." Obviously, Ms. Linda thought of something bad. Although George didn't want to care about the other party's affairs, it was hard for him not to pay attention to Ms. Linda's current state. Looking at the guests around him, George reluctantly put down the buttered chicken leg and asked formally, "Linda, if you have anything to say to me, I can be a listener. You know, ignoring a crying lady is not a gentleman's behavior." Although Ms. Linda's emotions were not caused by herself, in order to spend the rest of the time comfortably, George still planned to try to comfort her. "Do you know? Barry and I are going to divorce," Ms. Linda confided, while silently shedding tears. "That's a pity," George echoed and asked, "Why is this happening?" "It's because of Peggy's education. We have a big disagreement." Ms. Linda wiped her tears and told the conflict between herself and her husband. Finally, she asked for help. "Your family situation is very similar to ours. How do you and your wife deal with the children?" When asked about this, George had a lot to say. He shared, "We will keep different opinions and never argue about such things." "How is it possible?" Linda asked in surprise. "What if you have different opinions?" "There will never be such a situation," George said affirmatively. In fact, the situation of the Cooper family is very similar to that of the Berry couple's family, but there are some differences. Mary in the Cooper family has a strong personality, while George has a gentle personality. When encountering problems that conflict, George, as a husband, often takes a step back. This is also the main reason why the Cooper family can always live in harmony. Read the correct version in 16:9 book bar. The situation of the Berry couple is different. It can be seen that the wife Linda is a strong woman. As for the husband Barry, although he looks taciturn, he is also a very opinionated person in his heart. In this way, two people with the same strong personality will inevitably have conflicts after living together for a long time. If it weren't for the genius daughter, they might still be able to make do. But Peggy's appearance caused the long suppressed conflicts between the couple to collectively erupt. Ms. Linda obviously realized some of the reasons in this regard. She looked at George, who had a gentle expression on the opposite side, and said, "You are a good husband." George smiled and did not deny this. "Can you tell me about your relationship as a couple?" Linda wanted to find some ways to solve her family's conflicts from the way the Coopers get along. Okay, George obviously realized Linda's intention. He was kind enough to share some experience with the other party. But before he could speak, Ms. Linda shrank under the table with a panicked look on her face and said, "Don't tell others, I've been here." After that, Linda half squatted and hurriedly left from the side door of the fast food restaurant under George's confused expression. Although he didn't know what the other party was like, George was greatly relieved when he saw the trouble leave and then picked up the buttered chicken leg again and was about to put it in his mouth. "Hey, George, what a coincidence." Another familiar voice came from the main door at the back. "What a coincidence." Mr. Berry, seeing the man sitting opposite him, George greeted him helplessly. "Do you have any guests here?" Berry asked, looking at the water cup left on the table in front of him. "No, not." George finally understood why Linda had that reaction just now. It is normal for a couple who are in conflict not to want to meet each other. "George, you know, Linda and I are preparing a divorce agreement." Mr. Berry, who sat down, also looked like he wanted to find someone to talk to. "That's terrible." George, who had obviously heard about this once, pretended to be surprised. "In fact, there have been signs of our conflict a long time ago." Mr. Berry chatted about his troubles. The other party was already like this, and to show respect, George had to put down the cream chicken leg again, and be a listener again. Chapter 175 Troubles, continued. In the museum lecture hall, as the female teacher spoke, Peggy's face showed a bored expression. Mike and little Sheldon were in a similar situation. The three of them all found that the course taught by the female lecturer was almost exactly the same as the knowledge in the brochure. Peggy, who was worried, finally couldn't stand it anymore and whispered, "Mike, the knowledge taught here is too basic. Why don't we go out for a walk?" Mike also had this idea. The female lecturer's teaching method of reading from the book was a waste of life for him with an IQ of almost 180. This kind of knowledge, that can be remembered after reading it once, does not need too much review. "Okay." Mike nodded to the little girl, then turned to the little Sheldon on the other side and said, "Sheldon, do you want to go out for a walk?" Little Sheldon, who was also bored, showed an interested expression after receiving the invitation. But soon, he shook his head and said, "We have agreed with George that he will come here to pick us up in a while." Obviously, little Sheldon, who has always abided by the rules, does not want to have uncontrollable accidents because of himself. Just when Mike was about to persuade him, Peggy next to him seemed to see through Sheldon's mind. She said with a hint of sarcasm, "Forget it, Mike. Forget about that little kid who never grows up. Let's go." In a way, Peggy envied Sheldon a little. In the little girl's heart, she knew that her emotional intelligence and IQ were higher than his. However, she also keenly discovered that Sheldon, who was better than her in all aspects, had a happy family that she didn't have, and a handsome and smart friend like Mike. Maybe even Peggy herself didn't realize that she was jealous at this moment. This is why she always targets Sheldon intentionally or unintentionally. Now Peggy teased Sheldon again, and while the female lecturer turned around to write on the blackboard, she pulled Mike and ran out. This kind of excitement of doing bad things made the little girl forget her troubles temporarily. While running on tiptoe, she unconsciously showed a little smile on her face. Little Sheldon, watching his good friend being abducted, recalled Peggy's comment about him being a good kid. After a brainstorm, little Sheldon stood up firmly, like a warrior going to the battlefield, and chased Peggy out. He wanted to prove that he was not a child, and that he was no worse than Peggy. Outside the lecture hall, Peggy let go of Mike's hand, and a faint blush appeared on her face. Mike, wearing a simple white shirt, and with messy hair, was handsome with a charming sense of laziness. For the girl, the lethality was seriously exceeded. "Where do you want to go?" Peggy calmed down and said, "I know the surroundings well. As mentioned earlier, Peggy's parents brought her here last year. Why not find a quiet place and eat something?" Mike said after thinking for a while. It was almost lunchtime, and a quiet place was also conducive to communication. Yes, Mike was planning to help the little girl solve her troubles. "Okay, I just know a dessert shop. We can go try it," Peggy said with a smile. Just then, little Sheldon caught up with his short legs. "Where are you going?" little Sheldon asked with a short breath. It can be seen that skipping classes puts a lot of pressure on him. This is a rare rebellious moment for little Sheldon. "We are going to the dessert shop. Do you want to go together?" Mike asked. "That's not good. If we walk too far, what if George can't find us later?" Little Sheldon hesitated. Without waiting for Mike to speak again, Peggy glared at little Sheldon with dissatisfaction and said, "Mike, let's go. Don't worry about that follower." After that, the little girl pulled Mike again and walked out of the museum. But when passing by the primitive exhibition hall, the little girl stopped. looking at the scene in the exhibition hall where the primitive family was having fun around the bonfire. Peggy was absent-minded for a moment. "Wait for me, little Sheldon," who didn't want to be left alone, caught up again. His words also interrupted Peggy's thoughts. The little girl said again in annoyance, "Why are you following me again?" "I'm not following you," little Sheldon explained seriously. "Mike promised George to watch me, so I can't leave his sight." This explanation was very simple and reasonable. "Okay, let's go eat quickly. Maybe we can come back before the speech ends." Mike made a reasonable suggestion and diverted the attention of the two little prodigies. Then, under the leadership of Peggy, the three of them came to a secluded dessert shop. A perfect version of the book in 1619. The environment in the store is very good. After the three of them sat down, Mike asked, "What do you want to eat?" "A glass of freshly squeezed juice and a strawberry cake," Peggy said skillfully. "A glass of milk and a colorful fruit tart." Little Sheldon looked at the menu and made a choice. "Is that all?" Mike asked. After seeing the two children nod, he called the waiter, ordered a meal for the two of them, and also ordered a glass of milk and a fruit pizza for himself. After everything was served, Peggy ate the strawberry cake in front of her, hesitated for a long time, looked up and asked, "Mike, you said last time that you would be a qualified listener. Does it still count?" "Of course, if you have any troubles, you can always talk to me," Mike replied, ignoring the little Sheldon who was happily enjoying the dessert on the side. Peggy said, "I found that my parents have been arguing more and more frequently recently. Although they deliberately avoided me and my sister, I still know that they are preparing for a divorce." The little girl finished talking about what she found and finally said, "If it weren't for me, they might not be like this." Obviously, Peggy, who has a very high IQ, also realized that she was the fuse of her parents' quarrel. This discovery made her very depressed. She even vaguely attributed her unhappiness and family disharmony to her super high IQ. In Peggy's current cognition, she felt that if she was just an ordinary child, her parents might not have so many conflicts because of her and would not have reached the point of divorce. "Have you ever thought about how to get out of the current predicament?" Mike asked tentatively. "I want to go to my grandmother's house in the countryside and start being an ordinary child again." Peggy said, "Without me at home, my parents shouldn't quarrel anymore." From this, we can see that Peggy is really sensible. She plans to hide her talent in exchange for family harmony. It's just because of her age that she couldn't find the root of the problem. Disguising as an ordinary child can't solve her troubles. Escape can't solve the problem. Little Sheldon, who was eating a fruit tart, suddenly said. Although little Sheldon lives very self-centeredly, he has initially recognized Peggy in these few contacts. "Then what do you think I should do?" Peggy asked angrily. It can be seen that being interrupted made her a little emotional. "I don't know either." Little Sheldon was not affected by Peggy's emotions. He thought about it and said truthfully, with a happy family, it is difficult for him to personally feel Peggy's troubles. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.